Hello everyone and welcome back to the Unexplained Diaries. Here on this channel I share real-life encounters with beings from beyond the skies to help you unwind and drift off to sleep. Before we dive in, I would love to hear from you. Leave a comment and let me know where you're tuning in from. Now, find a comfortable spot, relax, and let's begin. I'd set up my telescope in the backyard just like I did every clear night, hoping to catch something interesting. It was late, maybe around midnight, and the sky was clear, stars all out in full force. I'm not an expert or anything, just a guy who likes watching the stars and messing around with my camera gear. I keep a small setup on the tripod next to the scope so I can record what I'm seeing. Mostly it's just satellites, planes, or sometimes the International Space Station passing by. Nothing too exciting. That night, after about half an hour of scanning the sky, I noticed this small blinking light far off near the eastern horizon. It didn't look like any plane I'd seen before. The blinking was steady and slow, kind of like a lighthouse, but way too high for that. I pointed my telescope and camera at it and started recording. The light was moving, but very slowly, much slower than any plane or satellite I'd tracked. I watched for a while, and the light kept blinking on and off like clockwork, no change in brightness or color. It wasn't a flashing aircraft light, which usually blink in a pattern, and it wasn't moving in a straight line either. More like it was drifting across the sky. I kept recording as it crossed the stars. Later, when I looked at the footage on my computer, the first weird thing jumped out at me. The timestamp on the video file showed that the light took almost an hour to move just a few degrees across the sky. I paused and rewound the footage a few times, checked the time code carefully, and even compared it to star trails in the background. The stars moved naturally, consistent with Earth's rotation, but the blinking light barely moved at all, like it was stuck to some strange path or hovering. At first, I thought maybe it was some glitch with my camera clock or recording software. I'd had minor sync issues before, but nothing this wild. So I cross-checked the system time on my laptop, my phone, even an old wall clock nearby. Everything matched perfectly. The video's internal timestamp was consistent with the other devices. I played the footage over and over, zooming in, trying to find something normal, maybe a plane or a drone with a weird blinking light. But it didn't look mechanical. No sound, no blinking pattern that I recognized. Just a steady, slow blink like it was pulsing on and off, drifting gently across the sky over the course of nearly an hour. The other odd thing was, when I was outside watching it, time felt normal. I remember glancing at my watch several times, and it always seemed like the light was moving slowly but steadily. I'd check the clock to make sure I wasn't zoning out. I didn't feel like time was dragging or anything weird like that. I even stepped inside the house for a few minutes at one point and came back out, and the light was still there, still blinking exactly the same way, and still moving barely at all. No plane had come by to check it out, no radio chatter, no sirens. The neighborhood was quiet. I tried to see if anyone else had noticed it, but no one seemed to be outside. I live in a small town, and most people aren't night owls, so that made sense. Still, it felt strange to be the only one staring at this odd blinking light for so long. By the time the light disappeared below the tree line to the west, it had been blinking and drifting for just under an hour. I shut down my gear and went inside, feeling weird, but not exactly scared. Just confused. The next day, I went through my camera and computer settings again, looking for anything that could explain the timestamps or the strange movement. Nothing. Everything was normal. No updates, no bugs, no errors. I uploaded the footage to a few astronomy forums just to see if anyone else had spotted anything unusual that night or had experience with long-duration, slow-moving, blinking lights. Most replies said it might have been a satellite, maybe some experimental military craft, or a high-altitude drone. But none of the usual objects take an hour to cross a few degrees of sky while blinking like that. Satellite passes are way faster, and planes don't move that slowly. Weeks later, I still keep the footage on my computer, and sometimes I go back to watch it again. It's unsettling because nothing about it fits what I know or expect. The stars move on, steady and predictable, but this light just drifts, blinking slowly as if it's on its own clock. I can't explain what it was. I don't know if it was something human, something else, or just some strange atmospheric effect I don't understand. But it stuck with me, mostly because I can't stop thinking about how something in the sky could just hover there for an hour, blinking out of sync with everything else. It happened about 3 years ago when I was doing overnight work for the State Highway Department. We were resurfacing a stretch of 2-lane out near Ridgeway, way out in the middle of nowhere. It was a weeknight, maybe Wednesday. Clear sky, no traffic. We worked from 9 p.m. to about 4 a.m., and most nights were dead quiet. That night was like any other. Warm, dry, no wind. Moon was maybe half full, and stars were sharp. We had cones set up along a quarter-mile stretch with floodlights at either end. I was manning the far side where the crew trucks were parked, mostly just directing equipment in and out, keeping an eye on things. Not exactly thrilling work, but I liked the quiet. Around midnight, I stepped away from the lights to take a leak behind the equipment trailer. I was maybe 50 feet from the road, facing the trees. That's when I noticed how still everything was. No bugs, no wind, not even the usual hum from the field beyond the tree line. Just dead quiet. As I zipped up, I saw a shadow move across the gravel near my feet. At first, I thought it was just clouds, but there weren't any. Sky was completely clear. I looked up, half expecting a bird or low-flying plane. Nothing, not even a single wisp of cloud. Just stars. But the shadow was real. It wasn't fast, it sort of glided across the road from west to east, smooth and slow. Covered the width of the highway, probably wider. There was no noise, no wind, no vibration. I remember that clearly because I just stood there waiting for something. A sound, a breeze, anything. But it was silent. I watched it cross over the floodlight beams and disappear into the trees on the other side. It was shaped long and irregular, not round or winged. Kind of like the outline of something huge but not solid, like a very faint, dark filter moving between me and the stars. Once it passed, everything stayed still. No animals, no wind. It didn't leave anything behind, not even a breeze, and the air felt heavy somehow. Not cold, just weighted. I stood there for a long time. I remember checking my watch, thinking maybe 5 minutes had gone by, but it had only been 1. I walked back to the road slowly, scanning the sky the whole time. Still nothing. I asked one of the other guys if he'd seen anything, but he just shrugged, said I probably saw a bat or something. But it wasn't that. Bats don't throw shadows like that, and I know what planes sound like. This was something else. The next weird thing didn't happen until maybe an hour later. I was sitting in the truck, half dozing, when the radio clicked on for a second. Just static, and then shut off again. We hadn't used the radios all night, and they're usually pretty solid. I looked at the handheld sitting in the charger, and the screen was blank, like it had been turned off, even though I hadn't touched it. Right after that, I heard a soft metallic clank from behind the trailer. Not loud, just one of those small, deliberate sounds, someone dropping a wrench onto pavement. I got out and checked. Walked the whole length of the trailer. No one there. Nothing had fallen. Everything was right where it should have been. When I came back around, I noticed something else. The gravel right near where I'd been earlier, where I saw the shadow, looked kind of off, like the rocks had been disturbed, but only in a narrow, straight band, maybe a foot wide. The rest of the gravel was dry and dusty, but this strip looked like it had been tamped down and pressed smooth, almost melted together. I bent down to touch it. It wasn't warm, just firmer, like the surface had been compressed. I didn't tell anyone, didn't feel like trying to explain that. I just stayed in the truck for the rest of the shift, door locked, radio off. The weirdest part happened on the drive home. I finished up around 4:15, got in my truck, and started heading south on Route 12, which runs through open farmland. Just as I was coming up over a low hill, maybe 10 minutes from the site, the headlights picked up something on the left side of the road. It was a shape, tall, thin, not moving. I slowed down, thinking it was a deer or a person. As I got closer, I realized it wasn't either. It looked like a narrow post or figure, maybe 7 or 8 feet tall, standing just inside the ditch. I passed it slowly, maybe 20 miles per hour, trying to get a better look without stopping. It didn't move. I only saw it for about 3 seconds, but I couldn't make out any details. Just a tall, vertical shape, dull gray, no shine or reflection. I checked my rear view, but the road behind me was empty. Nothing standing there anymore. That stretch of road has no turnoffs, no fences, nowhere something could hide. I drove home the rest of the way with the windows up and the radio off. The next day, I went back out to the site around noon just to see if the gravel still looked weird. It didn't. The whole area looked normal, like nothing had happened. The radio in the truck worked fine too. I didn't bring it up again with the crew. Nothing else weird happened that week, but I stopped volunteering for the Ridgeway shift after that. I woke up around 2:30 in the morning without knowing why. No noise, no bad dream. I just opened my eyes and knew something was off. The room was lit up faintly, which made no sense because I always keep it pitch black. I thought at first it was headlights through the window, but the light was too even, too soft. It was a dull blue, kind of washed out and slow pulsing it was breathing. Brighten, fade, brighten again. I sat up and immediately realized how quiet it was. Not just normal night quiet, dead quiet. No hum from the fridge, no whir from the ceiling fan, no power at all. I glanced at the clock next to the bed and saw nothing, just a blank screen. I got up and walked over to the window. That's when I noticed it wasn't just my room. The whole street was lit in that glow. Everything looked washed in this weird bluish tone, like a dim underwater filter. Houses, trees, the street. It was all softly pulsing, totally silent. There weren't any shadows. That was another thing that felt wrong. Even when lightning flashes or when a car drives by at night, things throw shadows. But this glow didn't have a direction. It just was, like it was coming from everywhere at once. I tried the bedroom light switch. Nothing. I went into the hallway, tried that one too. Still nothing. My phone on the nightstand was dead. Not off. Dead. Wouldn't turn on. I'd left it charging, and the cord was still plugged in, but it felt cold. At that point, I figured it was a power outage. Maybe a transformer blew or something. But that didn't explain the blue light. There were no emergency vehicles, no sirens. I looked out the window again, expecting to maybe see a utility truck, but the street was empty. And then I noticed my neighbor, Mr. Halpern. He was standing in the middle of his yard, barefoot, wearing pajama pants and a t-shirt, just standing there, staring straight up, not moving. I thought about calling out to him, but something stopped me. I don't know why, it just didn't feel right. I opened the front door instead. The air outside felt heavy, like just before a thunderstorm, but the sky was clear. No clouds, no stars, no moon, just that same blue glow. I stepped out onto the porch and listened. No insects, no wind, not even a dog barking in the distance. I called out, "Hey," toward Halpern's yard. He didn't react, didn't even blink. Just stood there with his head tilted back like he was frozen. I stepped off the porch and took a few cautious steps toward the street. The air felt thick, almost like walking through water. I could hear my own breathing louder than usual. Then I heard something else, faint but there. A low thrum, way off, like a generator muffled through concrete. It was steady and slow, rising and falling in sync with the pulsing light. I turned in a full circle trying to locate it, but it seemed to be coming from everywhere at once, just like the glow. I backed up and went inside. I tried flipping the TV on, then the kitchen lights, then the microwave. Nothing. I opened the fridge and the light inside was off. I touched the milk carton and it already felt warm. I decided to go check the breaker panel in the garage. When I opened the door to the garage, I froze. The blue glow was in there too, but it wasn't bouncing off the walls. It was in the air, like a fog or mist that wasn't really there, but made everything look just slightly out of focus. The workbench tools, the rake against the wall, the bags of potting soil, everything looked like it was covered in this weird electric haze. I walked over to the breaker panel and opened it up. Every switch was already flipped to on. I tried toggling them off and back on, but it didn't make a difference. I stood there staring at it for a minute, then heard something that made my stomach drop. Footsteps on the driveway. They were slow and light, like someone walking barefoot on concrete. I stepped back from the panel and looked toward the garage door windows, but I couldn't see anything through them. They were all lit from the outside by that same glow, and they looked like frosted glass. The footsteps stopped just outside. I didn't move. I just stood there, waiting. Nothing happened for a few seconds, And then I heard something brush against the side of the garage, a soft dragging sound like fingers on wood. That broke the spell. I backed out quickly and shut the door behind me. In the kitchen, I grabbed my keys and tried the front door again. I don't know what I was planning. Maybe to drive out of the neighborhood, see if it was happening somewhere else. But when I got outside again, my car looked wrong. The surface of it, the paint, was moving. Not literally, but the way the light hit it made it seem like the color was shifting, like looking at oil on water. I walked around it and saw the windows were fogged up, but from the outside. I tried the driver's door. It unlocked, but when I sat down and pushed the start button, nothing happened. Dead. No lights on the dash, no dome light, not even a click. I sat there in silence for maybe a minute. Then I noticed the radio screen was doing something. It was off, black, but there was this faint flickering behind it, like something pulsing behind tinted glass. No sound, just that light. I got out. When I stood back up, I noticed Halpern was gone. His yard was empty. That's when I got scared for real. I went back inside, locked the door, and sat in the living room with a flashlight that didn't work and a dead phone in my hand. I didn't know what else to do. I didn't want to go upstairs and leave the windows uncovered. The glow kept pulsing, but it was slowing down. The hum faded with it. After a while, I realized I could hear insects again, way off. Then a dog barked somewhere down the block. The fridge kicked back on, the fan started spinning, and just like that, it was over. Everything worked again. The blue light was gone. I checked outside. The sky looked normal. Stars were back. I never talked to Halpern about it. Never really talked to anyone. Honestly, I kept waiting for something about it to show up on the news, but nothing ever did. Power company said there was a temporary outage due to a blown line. They didn't mention the light. It started a little after midnight on a Tuesday. I was watching TV in the living room with the volume low. My wife had already gone to bed. It was one of those half-asleep nights where you're just flipping through channels, not really watching anything. That's when I felt it. Not heard, felt. A low, steady vibration. The couch cushions were buzzing under me, just slightly. I sat up, muted the TV, and tried to figure out where it was coming from. It wasn't the fridge. It wasn't the TV. The sound wasn't even coming from the house. It felt like it was underneath everything. Deep and low, like the sub-bass you get in movie theaters, but without the rumble. More like a pressure. I stood up and it got stronger. Not louder exactly, but more noticeable. My chest felt a little tight and the floor under my feet had this barely there tremble, like the kind you get when a heavy truck drives by, except it didn't stop. It just kept going, steady and smooth. I walked to the window and looked out. Nothing looked weird at first. Street was empty like usual, lights on in a couple houses, most of them dark. Then I noticed that the street lights looked dimmer, not flickering, just not as bright. Hard to describe. A little hazy around the edges. Right then my neighbor's car alarm went off. Just one at first. The Honda Civic parked right across the street. It blared once, paused, then kept going. Then, like a chain reaction, every single car on the block started going off at the same time. No delays. It wasn't like one got triggered and the rest followed. It was all at once. Horns, sirens, flashing lights. Every single one. I remember just standing there with my hands on the windowsill, completely still. The sound was overwhelming. Some of those alarms hadn't worked in years, I was sure of it. It was like they'd all been waiting for something to flip the switch. Then I realized I could still feel the vibration. It hadn't stopped. Even with the car alarms, I could feel it running through the floor, through the window frame, in my legs. Like the hum was underneath all the noise. Lights started coming on in houses up and down the street. People were stepping out onto porches, looking confused, some holding phones. I opened the door and stepped outside too. That's when I saw Jerry. 2 doors down, standing barefoot in his driveway in pajama bottoms and a hoodie. He looked at me and shouted something I couldn't hear over the alarms. I just shrugged. He pointed at the ground and mouthed the word, "under," with this look on his face like he wasn't sure he believed what he was saying. The alarms kept going. No one's key fobs were doing anything. People were trying. I saw them clicking away. Nothing worked. Some people were just staring at their cars like they expected them to stop on their own. I walked out to the middle of the street. The vibration felt stronger there, like the asphalt itself was buzzing. It didn't hurt, but it felt wrong, like standing on a big engine that hadn't been turned off. And then it all stopped, just like that. No slow winding down, no staggered cutoffs, just instant silence. All the alarms, all the flashing lights, the vibration, gone. The air felt empty after that, too still. I remember swallowing and realizing I couldn't hear anything. No crickets, no wind, no background noise, just nothing. One of the motion lights on my neighbor's garage flicked on. It was weird because no one was near it. The light came on, then went off again after a few seconds. Jerry walked over toward me, keeping his voice low now. "You felt it too, right?" "Yeah," I said. "Like under the street." He nodded. "I thought it was just me, like tinnitus or something, but in your chest." A few others had come out by then. Mrs. Alvarez from the corner was walking her little dog who refused to leave her yard, just sat down in the grass and wouldn't budge. I noticed a guy I didn't recognize, maybe visiting someone, just standing at the far end of the street, backlit by his porch light. He wasn't doing anything, just standing still with his head tilted a little like he was listening to something. His posture was weirdly straight, arms at his sides. He stayed like that for a long time, then slowly turned and went back inside. People started talking to each other, confused but quiet, like they weren't sure how loud they should be. One guy said he thought it was a gas line. Another said maybe a power surge. Nobody really bought it. I tried to turn my car on after that, just to see. It worked fine. Same with the lights in the house. Everything was back to normal. Except it didn't feel normal. Around 1:30, people started going back inside. There was this unspoken thing where we all kind of agreed to just stop talking about it. No one said that out loud, but it was like everyone just ran out of explanations at the same time and gave up. I stayed up for a while, sitting on the couch with the TV on mute. The dog, who usually sleeps through everything, wouldn't settle. She kept pacing back and forth between rooms and sniffing the corners. At some point, I must have dozed off. When I woke up around 4, it was quiet, totally normal, the kind of normal that makes you wonder if you dreamed the whole thing. But in the morning, I talked to Jerry again. He remembered. So did Mrs. Alvarez. So did a couple others on the street. It wasn't just me. The car alarms never did that again. I even asked around, and some of those cars didn't have alarms that were supposed to trigger at all. One guy said his truck hadn't made a sound in 10 years. I tried checking news sites, Twitter, the local Nextdoor group. Nothing. No reports, no mentions, not even people asking if there was a small quake or something. The city never said anything either. Not about gas lines or electric faults or underground maintenance. I still think about that sound, or that feeling, I guess. It didn't make sense then, and it doesn't now. I've lived here 12 years. Nothing like that ever happened before, and it hasn't happened again. It was late August, around 10 at night, and the air was finally cooling off after one of those long, hot days that just hang on into the evening. My daughter had gotten really into stars that summer, planets, constellations, all of it, so we'd started this little habit of laying out in the backyard with a blanket and some cheap binoculars after dinner. That night felt normal. She was 9 at the time, and still had that kind of running commentary going about everything she saw. That one's probably a satellite, or what if we saw a comet tonight? We were both lying there on the blanket, her in pajamas, me still in work clothes, and we were looking up at a clear, dark sky. No clouds, barely any moon. The cicadas were buzzing like usual, and the occasional car would pass on the road a few streets over. I remember I just pointed out Vega and was trying to show her how to trace Lyra when she interrupted me. She sat up a little and pointed west. "There's a bunch of them," she said. At first, I thought she meant a cluster of stars, but when I followed her finger, I saw what she meant. There were 5 lights, small, white, maybe the size of distant plane lights, but they weren't blinking, and they weren't moving like planes. They were in a diagonal line at first, almost like a tilted string of pearls, perfectly spaced, all the same brightness, all just hanging there, dead still. We watched them for maybe 20 seconds before anything happened. I didn't say anything right away. I was trying to make sense of it. They weren't moving at all, which ruled out planes. No sound either, not even a hum. Then, And this part I can still see in my head like a photo. They moved. All five shifted slowly, not jerky, just smooth and together, like they were connected. They spread out and formed a perfect square. Four lights made the corners, and one sat exactly in the center. The kind of symmetry that doesn't happen naturally. My daughter whispered, "What is that?" But I didn't answer. We just watched. The square stayed like that for what felt like several minutes. I remember checking my watch and realizing 2 full minutes had passed, then 3, and the lights didn't drift or flicker. They didn't wobble like drones do when they're trying to hover, just completely steady. After a while, I started getting this weird feeling, not scared exactly, but tense, like something was waiting. I couldn't shake the thought that we were being watched too, like we weren't just observing something far away, but that whatever it was might know we were watching. Then they broke formation. All 5 lights darted off in different directions, not fast like jets, but instant. One shot west, one east, one straight up, one diagonally down toward the tree line, and the center one just blinked out, like turning off a switch. No trail, no fade, just gone. I sat up fully and scanned the sky. Nothing. The rest of the stars looked normal, no movement, no sound. I asked my daughter if she saw all that. She nodded slowly and said, "I think they saw us." I didn't like that. I told her we were going in. We folded the blanket up and went inside, and I kept glancing over my shoulder like an idiot the whole time. The air felt thick, like a storm was coming, even though the forecast had said nothing but clear skies. Once we were inside, I locked the doors, which I never usually do until bed, and checked the backyard lights. Motion sensor flood on the garage didn't come on. I stepped out to wave a hand at it, thinking maybe it needed a reset, but it didn't react. Stayed dark. Back inside, I checked on my daughter. She brushed her teeth and got in bed without saying much. No follow-up questions, which was unusual for her. After she was asleep, I went back out to the porch with a beer and just sat there staring at the sky for maybe an hour. Nothing else happened. No lights, no noise. Next day, I asked a buddy of mine who's into drones and RC planes if he'd ever seen anything like that. He said even military drones don't move like that. Not that fast, and definitely not dead silent. I didn't bring it up again. Neither did my daughter. We still stargazed a few more times that fall, but we never saw anything like it again, and she stopped pointing out satellites. I was running a load through Nebraska, heading east on 80 around 2 in the morning. Long, flat stretch of nothing. Not a lot of lights, not a lot of anything, really. I'd been driving for hours at that point and figured I'd push another hour or two before stopping. The night was clear, no traffic, no wind, just that steady hum of tires on pavement. I checked my rear view out of habit and saw a pair of headlights behind me. Normal distance, not too close, but they caught my eye because they hadn't been there a second before. Nothing unusual though. Probably someone cruising up from behind. I kept going. 15 minutes later I checked again and those same lights were still there. Same distance, same spot. That was the first thing that felt off. Usually if someone's catching up, they either pass or drop back. These didn't. They just stayed right there. I watched them a little longer in the mirror and realized they weren't bouncing the way headlights normally do when a car hits little dips and seams in the road. They were dead still. Like 2 dots painted on glass. I thought maybe it was another truck pacing me, but the lights were wrong. Too low for a semi, too wide apart for a small car. I couldn't see the vehicle itself, just the lights. And they didn't throw light on the road behind me, which I didn't notice until later. I changed lanes to see if they'd follow. They did. Perfectly. No hesitation, no drift. I went left. They went left. I went right again. Same. No change in distance, just locked in. So I figured, all right, maybe it's someone screwing around, maybe another driver being weird. I slowed down a bit, hoping they'd either pass or back off. They didn't. I dropped 10 miles an hour under the limit. Still there. I tapped my brakes lightly, just a couple pulses. No reaction. No change in the lights. No dimming. No flicker. Nothing. I was on edge now, starting to feel that tightness in my chest I get when something doesn't sit right. I flipped on my CB and asked if anyone else was on that stretch, if anyone saw the vehicle behind me. Dead air. I scanned through a few channels. Nothing. Just static. I pulled off at the next rest area. One of those tiny ones, just a bathroom and a couple vending machines. I swung the truck wide into a spot near the end of the lot, angled so I could see the ramp. As I slowed down and pulled in, I checked the mirror again. No lights. I waited, watched the entrance. Nothing came in. I stepped out of the cab and walked to the back, pretending to check my trailer. Cold air, quiet, not even any wind. The lot was empty except for one minivan, dark and parked way off by the bathrooms. No other semis. No headlights on the highway either, which struck me as odd considering how steady traffic had been before. I walked out a bit, past the edge of the lot where the grass started, just to get a better view of the ramp and highway. Still nothing. No cars, no lights, just quiet. I stayed there a few minutes, long enough to feel stupid for being nervous, then headed back to the cab. When I climbed up and shut the door, the interior dome light didn't come on. That happens sometimes. Maybe the bulb was out. But when I turned the key to check the dash lights, nothing lit up. No power. Dead. I sat there in silence. Didn't move. My phone was in the mount, but the screen was black. Not off. Just black. I pressed the power button. Nothing. Tried holding it down. No restart. No buzz. Just dead. Then I saw the headlights again, not in my mirrors, through the trees on the far end of the rest area. 2 white dots, low and steady, peeking through the trees like someone was parked out there with their lights aimed right at me. But the angles didn't make sense. That part of the lot didn't have an exit, and there was a chain link fence separating it from the woods. I watched for a while, not blinking, not breathing much. The lights didn't move, didn't dim, didn't cast shadows. They weren't shining on anything, just floating there. I opened the door slowly and climbed down, not really knowing what I was going to do. Walk toward them? Hide? I don't know. I just stood there with one hand on the door, staring. The lights blinked out, not faded, just snapped off like someone hitting a switch. 1 second they were there, the next they weren't. The woods went black. Then my truck lights came on. Interior first, then dash. Everything booted back up like normal. Phone vibrated and lit up. Radio powered on. Even the dome light came on. Bright and warm like nothing had happened. I climbed back into the cab and started the engine. No warnings, no errors. Everything sounded fine. I pulled out of the rest area and got back on the highway, glancing in my mirrors the whole time. Nothing behind me. About 20 minutes later, I passed another truck going the other direction and tried the CB again. This time, I got a response. Just a quick, loud and clear driver from some guy heading westbound. I asked if he'd seen anything strange on the road. He just said, "Not tonight," and signed off. I made it to the next truck stop, filled up, and sat in the lot for a while eating vending machine junk and trying to figure out what to do next. I didn't tell anyone when I got home. I didn't tell anyone, not my dispatcher, not the guys at the yard, not my wife. I didn't know what to say. I still don't. It was a little after 10 when I took Gus out for his walk. That's my dog, big shepherd mix, kind of skittish but sweet. He hates loud noises and other dogs, so I usually take him out later when it's quiet. We do this loop around the neighborhood, past a stretch of open field at the edge of a small tree line. There's not much out there, just tall grass, some scattered trees, and power lines running through it. It backs up to a park and then some light woods, but at night it feels pretty empty. No streetlights past a certain point. Just the glow from the houses behind you, and then dark. Gus gets a little weird near that field sometimes. Not in a scared way, just more alert. He pulls the leash tighter, stops to stare into the grass. I usually don't think much of it. Probably raccoons or deer. That night was different though. He stopped hard at the edge of the sidewalk, right where it borders the field, and wouldn't go forward. He does that sometimes if he smells something strong, but this wasn't that. His ears were up, and he had this low whine going, not barking, that anxious little hum he does when something's off. I looked out across the field and didn't see anything at first, just the grass moving a little in the breeze. Then I noticed this shape, big, dark, and kind of just there, above the far end of the clearing. It looked like it was hovering maybe 30 or 40 feet off the ground. It was hard to tell because it wasn't lit up in a normal way. No blinking lights or engine sounds, just this dull reddish glow coming from underneath it, like a low ember. Not bright, more like the light from a dying fire. It wasn't moving at all. I mean, perfectly still. No bobbing, no drifting, no noise, just frozen there like it was pinned in place. I thought maybe it was a drone at first or some weird kite, but it was too big. Way too big. Bigger than a car. It had this wide, flat bottom, kind of a rounded edge to it. Not a shape I could easily describe. Gus wouldn't take his eyes off it. He wasn't growling or barking, but he kept shifting his weight back and forth, like he wanted to bolt but couldn't decide which direction. I just stood there. I don't know how long, maybe a minute, maybe more. Then I noticed something else. The usual background sounds were gone. No bugs, no wind in the trees, nothing. Even the power lines buzzing overhead had gone quiet. It was like everything around us had hit pause. I didn't even hear my own breathing until I really focused on it. I took out my phone to get a picture, but the screen was black. Not dead, just frozen. Wouldn't respond. The flashlight wouldn't come on either. I tried to hold down the buttons to restart it, but nothing worked. The screen was stuck on that faint backlight glow, but totally unresponsive. While I was fiddling with it, the glow under the thing started to pulse, slowly. Not bright, more like it was breathing. It didn't change color or anything, just got a little dimmer, then a little stronger, then dimmer again. I looked back up at it and realized I couldn't see any clear outline of the sky around it. The stars were blocked out where it hovered, but not in a clean shape. The edges sort of shimmered, like heat waves or rippling water, but only around the object. The rest of the sky was clear. I took a step back, and that must have startled Gus because he suddenly jerked the leash and tried to run. I held him, but he was panicking now, scrambling at the ground like he wanted to be anywhere else. I turned to go, but I glanced back one more time. And that's when it vanished. Not flew off, just blinked out, like someone turned off a light. 1 second it was there, pulsing faintly above the field, and then it wasn't. No noise, no wind, no flash. Just gone. The stars behind it were visible again like nothing had been there at all. The silence stayed for another few seconds, then everything came rushing back. The crickets, the distant hum from the power lines, the faint rustle of wind in the trees. My phone restarted on its own, screen bright and normal, like nothing happened. Gus dragged me half the way home, and I let him. I didn't even try to look back. I don't know what I expected to see, but I didn't want to check. I didn't tell anyone right away. Not my husband, not my friends. I checked online the next day to see if anyone else had posted anything, but there was nothing. No weird lights, no reports, not even noise complaints. The weirdest part, looking back, is how still it all felt. I've seen drones before. I've seen helicopters fly low. There's always sound, always motion, always some sense of gravity. This thing didn't have any of that. It was just wrong. Not dramatic or flashy, just still, too still. I got back from my run around 3:10 a.m., according to my phone. I know that for sure because I checked the screen as I turned the corner to my building. I'd run a little longer than usual, trying to shake off some stress. Work had been rough that week. The neighborhood's quiet enough at night, safe, and I'd done that loop probably 50 times before. But something felt off that night. It started about halfway through, maybe 15, 20 minutes in. I remember realizing I hadn't seen a single car go by. No headlights, no street noise. Even the houses were darker than usual. I run past a row of small ranch-style homes with porch lights always on. That night, every one of them was dark. I told myself I was just being weird, overthinking it. I put in my earbuds again and kept moving. It was one of those still nights. No wind, no bugs, not even the usual buzz from the streetlights. Everything felt kind of flat, like a soundproof room. I got back to my street and immediately noticed the porch light was off. I always leave it on if I know I'll be out after dark. I figured the bulb finally died. No big deal, but then I saw the front door. It was open, not all the way, but cracked just a couple inches, enough to see the edge of the hallway wall inside. I live alone. I always lock the door when I leave, even if I'm just walking to the corner store. I stood there on the sidewalk for a few seconds, not moving. No lights were on inside, and there was no sound. I pulled my earbuds out and walked up slow, trying to remember if I might have forgotten to lock it, or maybe I didn't pull it shut hard enough. But I know I did. I always check it. I didn't go in right away. I leaned in and said, "Hello?" Real quiet. No answer. I pushed the door open with my knuckle, just enough to peek inside. Everything looked normal at first. Shoes by the mat, jacket hanging on the hook. I stepped in, heart going hard in my chest, and reached for the light switch. Flipped it. Nothing. That made me stop. I stood there for a few seconds, trying to adjust my eyes. It was pitch black inside. I checked my phone again. Screen lit up fine. Still showed 3:10. I used the flashlight to look around. No signs of a break-in. Nothing broken. Nothing moved. I walked through the place, every room, real slow. I checked the bathroom, kitchen, even the closet. No one there. Then I noticed the microwave clock, 2:36. I didn't think anything of it at first. Probably a power flicker. But then I checked the stove. Same thing. 36. I went into the bedroom. The alarm clock. 2:36. Frozen. Not blinking like it had reset. Just stuck like it was paused. I looked back at my phone. 3:14 now. So about a 40-minute difference. I stood there for a long time, just staring at the screen, then back at the clocks. I even turned the microwave off and on again. Nothing changed. Time just stayed stuck. I opened the clock app on my phone and let it sit next to the stove for a couple minutes. The phone ticked forward. The stove stayed at 2:36. I tried turning on a few more lights. None of them worked. I unplugged a lamp, plugged it into a different outlet. Nothing. The outlets were dead, but my phone was still at 75%, and the cell signal was fine. I went back to the front door to make sure it wasn't just a bad dream or something. Still cracked open. Porch light still off. When I stepped back inside, I heard this faint ticking sound. Not like a clock, more mechanical, irregular. I followed it, thinking maybe something was stuck in the fan or the fridge compressor was dying. It led me to the closet in the hallway. I stood outside of it for a long time, holding my phone up. The sound stopped as soon as I touched the doorknob. Just dead silence. I opened the door. Empty. Coats, vacuum cleaner, same as always. Nothing in there that could make a sound. I shut the door and stood there for a second, and right then, every light in the apartment flicked on at once. Just boom. All at once. Bright and sudden, no hum or warm-up. The clocks didn't restart. They were still frozen. I checked the time again on my phone. 3:23. I went back into the kitchen and tried turning on the TV. It worked. Everything worked. Fridge humming, ceiling fan spinning, but the clock stayed stuck. I set the microwave manually just to see. It worked fine after that. So did the oven clock and the one in the bedroom. They all started keeping time again once I reset them, just that weird freeze at 2:36. I tried to sleep, but I kept looking over at the hallway closet, like I was expecting to hear that ticking again. The next morning, I checked the breaker panel. Nothing tripped. I called the building manager just in case someone had been doing maintenance. He said no one touched anything. I still don't know how the door opened. I don't know how all the clocks could freeze like that while the rest of the apartment kept power. And I've never had an electrical issue like that before or since. The only other thing I noticed, and I didn't think much of it at the time, was this smudge on the inside of the front door, about chest height. Looked like someone had pressed their hand there, palm out, and left a faint outline. I wiped it off the next day. We were parked at that overlook off Route 14, just past the old radio tower, the one with the wide turnout and the little wood railing. It's not really a secret spot, but it's quiet most nights. We'd gone up there before just to sit, talk, sometimes eat takeout, and look at the stars. You can see a long way from up there, over the hills and out past the town. That night was clear, no moon, no wind. One of those really still nights where sound carries. I remember we were eating leftover pizza from the back seat, talking about nothing in particular. It was late, probably close to midnight. The stars were bright, like brighter than usual. I mentioned that to her. She looked up and said something like, "Yeah, weirdly clear tonight." I leaned back against the headrest, just kind of zoned out looking at the sky. I wasn't thinking about anything, but then I noticed something that pulled me out of it. It wasn't dramatic. It was so subtle that at first I wasn't even sure it had happened. It was the stars. A group of them, maybe 5 or 6, just seemed off, like their positions shifted a tiny bit, not twinkling, not fading in or out, just moved, barely. I kept staring, thinking maybe it was my eyes or clouds I couldn't see or the car window distorting things. But I rolled the window down and looked again, directly up. They moved again. Same group of stars, same slow glide. Not in a falling star way, not fast or streaking. Just a gentle shift, like they were being dragged. Not downward, sideways. I asked her if she saw it, and she was quiet for a second. Then she leaned forward and said, "Wait, wait, that's not right." She opened the door and stood outside, looking straight up. I followed her. We both stood next to the car, just watching. Above us, and I still don't know how to explain this right, there was this patch of sky that wasn't sky. It was shaped like a wide oval, or more like an uneven, long hexagon. You couldn't see the edges, not clearly, but you could see that everything inside that shape was wrong. The stars inside it moved slowly in unison, like they were painted on a curved surface that was drifting. It was almost like a ripple or heat distortion, but huge. Like a stadium hovering way above us with a fake sky painted on the bottom of it. No lights, no sound, just this thing gliding overhead, so big that it blocked maybe a quarter of the sky. But it was quiet, completely silent. We just stood there staring up with our mouths open. It moved so slow, I couldn't tell how high it was. Could have been way up or just a few hundred feet. There was no depth to it, nothing reflective, just that fake patch of moving sky. She whispered, "Are we seeing this?" I said, "Yeah." That's all I could say. "Yeah." Then the dog in the back seat started whining. We hadn't even noticed him until that moment. He'd been asleep, curled up on the blanket, and now he was pawing at the window, low growl in his throat. He's usually not like that. Not a nervous dog. We watched that thing drift for maybe another minute, maybe two. The distortion moved past the tree line and just kept going. It didn't speed up, didn't make a sound. Eventually, it blended back into the stars. We stood there long after it was gone, staring at the sky, waiting for something else to happen. Nothing did. We didn't even talk for a while. Just got back in the car. I remember the heater was blowing too warm and the radio screen was glitching, like the song info kept flickering and jumping around. I turned it off. We drove home slowly, maybe 15 under the limit. Neither of us said much until we hit the main road again and saw the traffic light blinking like normal. She finally asked me what I thought it was, and I said I didn't know. I meant it. The next morning I went online and looked up weather balloons, drones, stealth aircraft, anything I could think of. Nothing matched. There were no flight paths that night in that area, at least not according to anything I could find. But the thing is, I know what we saw. Not in the sense of understanding it, but in the sense that it was real. It was massive. It wasn't a trick of the eyes or clouds or a dream. It was above us, moving and blocking the stars with something that pretended to be sky. That's all I know. I was out on Lake Ingraham, early October. Middle of the week, no one else around. I fish out there a lot, usually in the evenings, but that night I pushed it a little later than usual. Figured I'd get in one last cast before the weather turned. It was calm. Dead calm. Not even a breeze. The surface looked like black glass. I was in my little John boat, just drifting. Didn't even bother with the anchor. I'd turned off my headlamp to let my eyes adjust, so it was just me, the water, and the occasional creak of the boat. You don't realize how loud nothing is until you're out there alone with it. I'd caught 2 small bass earlier, nothing special. Around 10, I reeled in and just sat for a while. The stars were out and the shoreline was barely visible, just a faint line of darker black against the sky. Then I noticed this glow under the water. Pale green, soft but bright enough to catch my eye. It started as just a little haze, maybe 10 feet off the left side of the boat. I thought it might be someone diving with a flashlight or some kind of submerged buoy light, but it was too smooth, too steady. It didn't shimmer like light usually does underwater. No flickering, just a solid, even glow that slowly got brighter and wider as it rose. It wasn't moving fast, kind of a lazy drift upward, like something floating up from the bottom. I leaned over the side to get a better look, holding my breath without realizing it. The light kept coming up until it was right beneath the boat. I'd guess it was no more than 4 or 5 feet down. That's when it stopped. Just sat there under me. Not moving, not pulsing, just this perfectly round glow, almost the size of the boat, maybe bigger. I didn't hear anything. No bubbling, no hum. The water didn't ripple, didn't push the boat at all. That part really got to me. You'd expect something that close to make at least a little current. but it was like the water wasn't reacting to it. I dug my phone out of my tackle box, but as soon as I tapped the screen, it froze, wouldn't unlock. Just stayed on the black screen with the time. 10:47 p.m. Tried the buttons, tried swiping, nothing. I looked up and the light was still there. Still not moving. I don't know how long I sat there. Could have been a minute, could have been 10. My watch said 10:47 too, which was weird. I'd glanced at it a little earlier and remembered that it had already said 10:47. Then, without warning, the light started to fade. Not dimming exactly, more like it was sinking. Slowly. Just drifting straight down like it came up. Same speed. No change in shape or brightness until it passed a certain depth. Then it started to dull. I watched it shrink until it disappeared. No splash, no bubbles, no disturbance at all. The water went right back to being pitch black. The boat hadn't moved. When I finally looked back at my phone, it was working again. Unlocked normally. The time said 11:12. My watch matched it. I reeled in what was left of my line. I must have dropped the rod when I saw the light because it was sitting loose on the floor of the boat. And I started the motor. Took it real slow getting back to the launch. Didn't want to look at the water. I checked online for anything about underwater lights in the area, dive teams, research equipment, nothing. There's nothing in that lake except fish and old trees. No underwater power lines, no reason for a light like that. I haven't been back out there since. Not because I'm scared exactly. I just don't feel right about it. Something about how still the water was. Like it wanted me to see it, or like it didn't care if I did. I didn't even check the camera right away. That was the weird part. I'd set it up mostly out of habit. I've got 5 trail cams around my property, some for deer, some just because I like knowing what's out there. We've got coyotes, the occasional bear, nothing unusual. I live alone just outside of Winchester, Virginia. Couple wooded acres, not remote, but quiet enough. My nearest neighbor's about half a mile off. I set the camera on the backside of the woods near an old game trail that cuts past a fallen oak. It doesn't get much traffic anymore. I hadn't pulled the card for a few weeks. It was February, cold, and I wasn't expecting much movement. That night I'd been inside watching a movie when the power flickered. Not long, maybe a second or two, just enough to kick off the TV and reset the router. I looked out the kitchen window and noticed something odd. Just a glow through the trees. Not moving, not flickering like a fire. Just this pale light, like someone had set up a lantern in the woods. It didn't make sense. I walked out to the back deck, and the light was gone. No sound, no wind. Dead still out there. It was around 2 a.m., and the snow was fresh, maybe an inch that fell earlier that evening. I figured maybe headlights had bounced weird off the trees or something. Nothing else seemed off. I didn't think about it again until Sunday afternoon. I was clearing out old footage from the trail cams and got to the one by the fallen oak. There was a motion clip time-stamped the night the power had flickered, 2:03 a.m. At first it looked like nothing, just the trees, the snow, some faint branches swaying. Then this shape drifted across the frame. I don't know what else to call it. It wasn't an animal, wasn't a person. It didn't walk or run or fly, it just moved through. It wasn't solid. That was the part that made my skin crawl. It gave off light, very soft white-blue light, but it didn't have edges. It looked like a stretched balloon underwater, flickering slightly, like heat above fault. The trees lit up as it passed. Not just a camera artifact, it was clearly casting light. You could see the shadows move on the trunks, the snow glowing under it. It passed through the center of the frame in less than 2 seconds. Then gone. I replayed it probably a dozen times, slowed it down. There was no sound on the camera, but I strained to hear anyway, like maybe I'd missed something. It didn't touch anything. It didn't disturb snow. Just moved in a straight line from the left side to the right and vanished into the woods. What struck me was the direction. It had been moving toward my house. That was the last clip recorded that night. The camera didn't pick up anything else until 2 days later. A squirrel in daylight. I left the footage alone for a bit, didn't even mention it to anyone. It just unsettled me, more than I expected. A few nights later, I was out in the shed and heard something odd. Not a noise exactly, more like a pressure shift. Like when you're driving and the air changes in a tunnel. It lasted a few seconds. I stepped outside to listen, and the woods were completely silent. No wind, no owls, not even the usual creaks from the trees, just silent and still. I walked around to where the camera had picked up that shape. Nothing looked different. Same logs, same patchy snow. I stood there for a while, then went back in. I didn't sleep much that night. The next evening, I checked the camera again. Another clip had been recorded. This one was weirder, if that's possible. Same time, just after 2 a.m., same faint motion alert. But when I watched it, there was nothing there. No animals, no branches moving. But the trees lit up again. Same angle, same pale light sweeping across from left to right. But this time the source wasn't visible. Just the light. Like something was moving behind the camera and shining forward, but the shape never entered the frame. The trees cast long shadows toward the lens as if something bright had passed close behind. But the camera's motion sensor still triggered. That made my stomach turn a bit. The thing, whatever it was, had passed behind the camera this time. Closer to the house, I went out the next day to inspect it. There were no footprints. Snow had fallen again the night before, just a light dusting, but not enough to cover tracks completely, and nothing else had set off the camera. The battery was full, the lens was clean. That night, I stayed up, made coffee, sat by the back window with the lights off. I kept checking the trees for any movement, any glow. But nothing happened. Around 2:10, I did hear a very faint crackling sound, like twigs snapping under something light, but it only lasted a few seconds. I opened the back door and stepped onto the deck. Again, no wind, no movement. Just cold air and a faint metallic smell, like rain on old wiring. I didn't go far, just stood there listening until I couldn't feel my fingers. Then I went back inside. The next morning, the trail camera was off. I figured maybe the batteries finally died, but when I took it inside and opened the panel, they were fine. Full charge. The card was still inside. I turned it back on and it worked immediately. But there were no new clips. I replaced the batteries anyway and set it back up. That night, nothing. The next night, nothing. Then 3 days later, a new video appeared. Same time, 2:03 a.m. This one had sound. I didn't think the camera even had audio. It was cheap, an older model. But this clip had faint background noise. Not much, but enough to catch something strange. A kind of low-frequency hum, barely above a whisper, like someone humming a single note under their breath. It got louder as the clip progressed. The video itself showed the same light sweeping through the trees, but again, no shape. Just illumination, moving from left to right. The hum peaked right as the light faded, then silence again. I brought the clip into editing software to clean it up, boost the sound. There was nothing under the hum, no animal sounds, no wind, just that steady, low tone. I checked other clips from the same day, no sound on those, not even a hint. I haven't caught anything new since then. It's been over a month. The snow's melted. I still check the camera every few days, it works. Records squirrels, raccoons, the occasional deer, but no lights, no hum, no shapes. The woods seem normal again, but I've stopped going out there after dark. It wasn't supposed to be a big expedition, just a few of us who'd been caving for years, going to explore a system that had barely been mapped. It was deep in the mountains, far from any towns, a kind of place that felt untouched. We had a guide, local to the area, who told us the caves went on for miles. Some passages were tight, others opened into huge chambers, perfect for what we were looking for. The first day was uneventful. We descended through the main entrance, a wide gap in the rock face that sloped down into the earth. The air was cool, damp, and carried the smell of wet stone. There was nothing unusual about it. Stalactites, trickling water, the occasional bat. We marked our route, made notes, and set up camp in a dry chamber about 3 hours in. On the second day, we went deeper. The cave system branched off in several directions, and we decided to split into pairs to cover more ground. I went with Eric, a geologist who'd been on dozens of trips like this. He was methodical, always stopping to take samples and measurements, while I handled the mapping. We'd been exploring for a few hours when we found the chamber. At first, it didn't seem like anything special. The passage opened into a space about the size of a small house, with smooth walls and a ceiling that arched high above us. But then Eric pointed out something strange. The walls weren't entirely natural. There were grooves, evenly spaced, running in a spiral pattern from floor to ceiling. They looked carved, but not by tools, more like they'd been melted or shaped by something that didn't leave marks. In the center of the chamber was the artifact. That's the only word I can think of to describe it. It was about the size of a barrel, metallic and shaped like a cone with the tip broken off. The surface was covered in patterns that seemed to shift when you looked at them, as though they were alive. At first, I thought it was a trick of the light from our headlamps, but no, it was moving. Neither of us spoke for a while. We just stood there, staring at it. I don't know how long we stayed like that, but eventually, Eric broke the silence. He wanted to take a closer look, maybe even touch it. I wasn't so sure. Something about it made my skin crawl, like it didn't belong here. Or anywhere, for that matter. Eric didn't listen. He stepped closer and pulled out his tools, brushing away some of the dust and debris that had settled on the base. As he worked, a low hum started to fill the chamber. It wasn't loud, but it felt like it was vibrating in my chest. Eric froze, his hand hovering just above the surface of the artifact. "Do you hear that?" he asked. I nodded, but I didn't say anything. The hum was getting louder, and the air seemed heavier, like it was pressing down on us. That's when the artifact activated. I don't know how else to describe it. The hum turned into a deep, resonant sound that made the walls shake. Light started to pulse from the patterns on its surface, bright and sharp, like nothing I'd ever seen. Eric stumbled back, dropping his tools, and we both scrambled to the edge of the chamber. The sound grew louder, deeper, until it was almost unbearable. It wasn't just noise. It was energy. I could feel it in my bones, vibrating through me, making it hard to think. The walls of the chamber seemed to amplify it, focusing it into a single point above the artifact. Then, with a flash of blinding light, the sound stopped. The chamber was silent, the air still. For a moment, I thought it was over. But then we heard it, a low, distant rumble coming from somewhere far above us. The ground started to tremble, and bits of rock and dust fell from the ceiling. Eric grabbed my arm, yelling something I couldn't hear over the noise, and we ran. We made it back to the main passage just as the tremors subsided. I don't know how we managed to navigate the tunnels, but we eventually found the others. They were pale, shaken, and said they'd heard the sound too, even from the other side of the cave system. None of them had any idea what it was. We decided to leave. The artifact was too strange, too dangerous, and none of us wanted to stick around to see what would happen next. The hike back to the surface was tense, every sound and shadow making my heart race. When we finally emerged into the daylight, I felt a wave of relief until we saw the sky. There was something up there, just beyond the atmosphere. It looked like a faint ripple, like heat waves rising from pavement, but it moved with purpose. As we watched, it shifted and pulsed as though it were reacting to something. Then, with a final burst of light, it vanished. We didn't talk much on the way back to town. Eric and I tried to explain what we'd seen, but the others didn't want to hear it. By the time we reached civilization, it felt like we'd stepped back into a different world. The caves, the artifact, the light in the sky, it all seemed so far away. I don't know what the artifact was or why it reacted the way it did. But sometimes, late at night, I think about the sound it made, the way it seemed to call out, and I wonder if something somewhere heard it. I've been hiking alone for years. It's my thing, really. The quiet of the woods, the solitude of a long trek, far from the noise of city life, nothing beats it. That's what made me take the trip to the park that day. It wasn't my first time there, and I was looking forward to a long, peaceful walk along the river trail. But I can't explain it. Something felt different about that day. The weather had been odd that morning. There was a strange stillness in the air. But I didn't think much of it. It wasn't until I was well into my hike, just past the old trail markers, that the feeling started to settle in. It wasn't just the air, it was the whole place. The trees seemed quieter than usual. Even the river seemed to be running slower, almost as if the forest itself was holding its breath. I had been walking for a few hours when I reached a part of the trail I hadn't seen before. The path veered down to a small, secluded part of the riverbank where the trees crowded in closer and everything felt a little more enclosed. The water was clear, the kind of clear you don't see in many places. It was a spot I would have passed by without thinking, but something drew me closer. Maybe it was the perfect spot to sit down and rest for a while. I'd barely taken a few steps toward the river when I noticed something strange. There was a figure sitting at the water's edge, just ahead of me. At first, I thought it was someone else, another hiker, maybe someone who had taken the same trail, but the closer I got, the more I realized how wrong I was. This person wasn't human. It was sitting still, almost like it was waiting for something, just watching the river. At first, I couldn't make out any details. It was like a silhouette blurred by the trees and the shadows. But as I got closer, everything about it started to become clearer. It wasn't like anything I had ever seen. The figure was tall, though not in a way that felt unnatural. Its posture was rigid but calm. It was sitting cross-legged by the riverbank, staring at the water in front of it. I couldn't see its face clearly, but there was something about it that made the hairs on my neck stand up. The way the figure was dressed, or rather how its body seemed to be covered, wasn't fabric or any material I could recognize. It shimmered, like the light was bending around it. It almost looked like the figure was part of the landscape itself, blending in with the surroundings. I stopped dead in my tracks. For a moment, I thought about turning around and heading back down the trail, but my legs wouldn't move. I just stood there, staring at it. I knew it was wrong to stare, but I couldn't look away. My mind raced, wondering what I was looking at, but a strange calmness washed over me, almost like I was being hypnotized by the stillness of the scene. And then it did something. The figure, this thing, moved its head. Not like it had just noticed me, but more like it was acknowledging my presence. I froze, my heart racing in my chest. The air felt thick, heavy, like I was holding my breath without realizing it. That's when it happened. The thing, it spoke to me. Not with words, not out loud, but in my mind. A presence, an understanding. It was like it had been waiting for me to approach, like it knew I was coming. I could hear its thoughts, or at least I could feel them. They weren't human thoughts, but somehow they felt familiar, like the way you can just tell when someone is staring at you, even if you can't see them. It didn't speak in any language I could understand, but it didn't need to. The message was simple and unmistakable. Something is coming. I stood there, utterly still, as the sense of urgency washed over me. The figure didn't move, but the message grew stronger in my mind. It wasn't a warning in the way we usually think of warnings. There wasn't any fear in it, no panic. It wasn't threatening. It was just a fact, a statement, like telling someone it's going to rain. And then, without another movement, the figure turned its gaze back to the river. I didn't know what to do, what to say, or even how to feel. Part of me wanted to ask what it meant, but I knew I wasn't supposed to. I wasn't supposed to speak. I just had to understand what it had told me. Before I could take another step, it happened again. Only this time, I didn't hear it in my mind. I felt it. The ground beneath me trembled, just slightly, like something far off was shifting. The air grew thick again, this time colder, heavier. It felt like the world was holding its breath, just like the forest had been earlier that morning. The figure's presence faded, and I felt a strange pull in my chest. It wasn't physical, but it felt like I was being gently tugged, like the earth itself was trying to get my attention. The figure was still there, but I knew it was time to leave. Something was coming. I turned and walked away from the riverbank, but I didn't want to take my eyes off the creature. I couldn't explain it, but I knew it wasn't a being from this world. It wasn't human. It wasn't like anything I'd ever read about, not in science fiction or in the folklore I had learned over the years. But I also knew that it wasn't dangerous. It didn't want to hurt me. It had only wanted to share its warning, and now that it had, it was done. As I walked back down the trail, my mind was racing. What had it meant? What was coming? I didn't know, but there was a quiet certainty that I couldn't shake. There was no urgency in its words, no panic, but the message was unmistakable. Something was coming. When I finally made it back to the main trail, I looked over my shoulder, half expecting to see the figure still sitting there, but it was gone. The forest was calm again, the air lighter. It was like nothing had ever happened. But I knew something was wrong. I didn't know how I knew, but I knew. I don't know if anyone else would have believed me if I'd told them about it. I don't know if anyone would have understood, but that night I couldn't sleep. The message kept echoing in my mind. Something was coming. The next day, I found out. The local news reported it. A landslide in the nearby mountains, a massive one. A whole section of the trail had been wiped out. The damage was extensive. No one was hurt, thank God, but the destruction was worse than anything anyone had anticipated. I don't know if the creature was warning me about the landslide or if it was something else entirely. I'm not sure what it meant when it said, "Something is coming," but I don't think it was just about the landslide. It didn't feel like just an ordinary disaster. I haven't been back to that trail since. I don't think I'll go back. Maybe I was meant to see that creature. Maybe I wasn't. But I'll never forget the look in its eyes or the message it gave me. Something was coming. And whatever it was, I wasn't ready for it. I was working the night shift at this remote communications outpost out in the middle of nowhere, way up in the mountains where there's barely any light pollution. My job was mostly maintenance, checking signal equipment, and just keeping an eye on the place overnight. Usually it was pretty boring, but sometimes the isolation gets to you. That night, I stepped outside around midnight to take a break. The sky was clear and full of stars. At least that's what I thought at first. I looked up, just standing there with my coffee, when I noticed something odd. The stars weren't steady. They started to move, slowly at first, like the whole sky was spinning. I blinked, thinking maybe my eyes were messing with me, or I was just tired. I stared longer, trying to focus, and the movement kept going. The stars were rotating around some invisible center, and it was weirdly hypnotic. I pulled out my phone to check the time and maybe take a picture, but the screen's light suddenly felt too bright compared to the dark sky. That's when I realized it wasn't the stars moving at all. Something massive was slowly shifting in front of the sky. I couldn't see the edges clearly. It was just this enormous dark shape blotting out the stars as it moved. No lights, no noise. It wasn't like a plane or a satellite or anything I'd ever seen. I stood frozen, watching it glide silently overhead, covering more and more of the sky. The way it moved didn't feel natural either. It was smooth but deliberate, like it was aware it was being seen. I tried to call out, but my voice caught in my throat. The wind picked up, but there was no sound coming from the shape itself. I kept looking around, half expecting to see some lights from a nearby town or other workers coming out, but I was alone. The outpost was a few miles away from anything else, so no one could have missed this. As the shape passed over, the stars behind it vanished. For a moment, the sky was just an empty blackness with no stars at all, and it felt like the air got heavier, like something was pressing down. I could see my breath, and my hands started shaking. I tried to pull out my phone again, but the screen stayed blank, like the shape was blocking any signal or electronic interference. I put the phone away, not sure if it was worth trying to record something that probably wouldn't save properly anyway. It passed overhead, moving slowly, and then, just as quietly as it came, it drifted away, letting the stars come back into view. The spinning stopped, and the sky looked normal again. But I knew it wasn't normal. I went back inside and checked the security cameras around the outpost, hoping to see the shape on one of them, but the feeds all looked fine. No shadows, no moving dark shapes, just the usual empty landscape under the starry sky. I stayed inside the rest of the night, watching the sky through the window. Nothing else happened. When my shift ended, I packed up and left without saying much. I didn't know how to explain what I'd seen without sounding crazy. Even now, I'm not sure what it was. It wasn't an airplane or a drone. It didn't make a sound. The stars didn't move themselves. Something huge just drifted overhead, blocking the sky, and then vanished. I haven't gone back to that outpost since. The dog started barking around 3:17 a.m. every single night. Not just once or twice, but like clockwork for a week straight. It was weird because we live out in the country, and usually the dogs don't make a fuss unless there's a raccoon or something rustling through the bushes. But this barking wasn't normal. It was sharp, urgent, almost like the dog was warning us. I'm not the most observant when I'm half asleep, but my son kept waking up, telling us the dog was going crazy outside. We have two dogs, but it was always the younger one, Max, doing this. His bark wasn't like a threat, more like confusion or fear. It started to creep me out after a few nights because I'd check the clock every time I heard it, and sure enough, it was always 3:17, give or take a minute or two. On the third night, I got out of bed to see what was going on. I grabbed my phone, turned on the flashlight, and opened the back door slowly. The yard was dark, the moon just a sliver, barely lighting up anything. Max was standing at the edge of the porch, his hackles up, eyes fixed on the far corner of the yard. Nothing was moving, but he wouldn't stop barking. I stepped out, calling his name softly, trying to get him to calm down. Then I noticed something odd. The air felt different. Not cold, but heavy, like the quiet before a storm. The usual sounds of the night, crickets, the rustle of leaves, distant frogs, all seemed to drop away. It was dead silent, except for Max's barking. I didn't see anything, but the feeling wouldn't go away, so I went back inside and locked the door behind me. I told my wife about it the next day, but she brushed it off, said dogs sometimes get spooked by things we don't notice. Fair enough. The next night, same thing. Max barking at exactly 3:17. This time, my wife and I decided to check the security cameras we'd installed a few months ago after a string of break-ins in the neighborhood. We figured maybe there was someone lurking around or a wild animal close by. We rewound the footage to the time of the barking. The video showed the yard clearly, the porch light casting long shadows over the grass. But then something really strange happened. Right when Max started barking, the screen flickered with static for a split second. Nothing unusual there, cameras sometimes glitch, but when the image cleared, Max was gone. No dog in the yard at all, just empty grass and shadows. I rewound it and played it over and over. Max had been inside earlier, and the timestamp was right. We heard him barking, but the camera showed no sign of him stepping outside. The footage right before and right after that glitch showed the yard empty. The glitch lasted less than 2 seconds, but it was enough to erase Max from the video completely. I checked the other cameras around the house, but none of them caught anything unusual. Just a weird static glitch on the one facing the backyard. I showed it to a friend who's into tech, but he said it could be a minor camera malfunction, nothing to worry about. But it wasn't just the glitch. Over the next few nights, the barking got different. Sometimes Max would stop suddenly, like he saw something just at the edge of the yard, and then it disappeared. Other times, he'd stare straight into the darkness without moving his head, just locked on one spot, his body tense, tail stiff. One night, I stayed awake, watching the security feed live on my phone. At exactly 3:17, Max started barking again. I looked out the window at the yard. Still dark, still empty. The camera feed went blurry, static blooming across the screen for a few seconds. When it cleared, Max was gone. But I was watching the porch with my own eyes, and he was standing there, fur bristled, looking out. I felt my stomach twist. How could the camera not see him when I was right there? I blinked, thinking maybe my eyes were playing tricks. Then I noticed something else, a faint, pale glow near the far corner of the yard, barely visible through the bushes. It was dim, like the light of a cell phone screen, but without any shape or source. The light pulsed slowly, almost like it was breathing. Max barked at the glow, but then the light vanished. Max stopped barking immediately, his whole body relaxing as if whatever was there was gone. I kept staring into the dark, but it was empty again. I went outside after a few minutes to check. Nothing. No light, no footprints, no broken branches. After that night, Max's barking stopped completely. It was like nothing had ever happened. He acted normal, happy, back to chasing squirrels during the day. I kept checking the cameras, hoping to see that glitch again, or the light, but the footage was normal. No static, no missing dog, just ordinary nights. I still don't know what was there in the yard, something I couldn't see or catch on camera. Something that made my dog bark like he did, but vanished when we tried to prove it was real. That's the part that gets me. How can something be so present and then disappear like it was never there? I was out hiking alone in the Blue Ridge Mountains one weekend in late September. I like to get away from the city noise, just wander around with a backpack, some water, and my camera. This time I decided to check out a remote valley trail I'd never been on before. It's one of those spots where the trail is barely marked and the only people you might see are hunters or other hikers, but even they're rare. I started early, around 7 a.m., and the weather was cool but clear. The forest was quiet except for birds and the wind through the leaves. After a few hours, I dropped down into this small valley surrounded by steep hillsides covered in thick underbrush and scattered pines. The sunlight filtered down in patches, and the air smelled like damp earth and pine needles. I liked it, felt untouched. I was hiking along the edge of one hillside when I caught something out of place near a cluster of ferns. At first, I thought it was just some old trash or maybe a piece of discarded gear, but when I got closer, it didn't look like anything normal. It was this small object, about the size of a basketball, embedded partly into the slope. The surface was metallic but oddly smooth and a bit shiny, like aluminum but darker, maybe a dull gray with a slight bluish tint. It reflected the sunlight strangely, but not like polished metal, more like brushed or weathered, except it didn't have any scratches or rust. What really got me was that it looked like it was pressed right into the earth and rock. The ground around it was a bit disturbed, like it had been pushed there with some force. There was no dirt on the surface itself, which was weird because it was wedged in at an angle. I took a few pictures but didn't touch it. It felt wrong to mess with it. I circled around it, trying to figure out what it might be. It didn't look like any kind of equipment or gear I'd ever seen. No wires, no markings, no seams or bolts. Just a smooth, metallic oval shape partly sunk into the hillside. I tried to listen for any sounds. Nothing. No humming, no vibrations, just quiet. The forest seemed oddly still, like the birds had gone silent or stopped moving for a moment. That caught me off guard. I kept checking around, but everything looked normal, except for the stillness. I stayed there maybe 20 minutes, snapping photos and watching. The light shifted as the sun moved behind some clouds, and the object's surface seemed to darken with the shade, but it didn't disappear or change shape. I kept wondering how long it had been there. It didn't look old, but I couldn't imagine anyone bringing something like that out here and just leaving it. Eventually, I decided to head back. I told myself it was probably just some piece of scrap metal or maybe part of an old survey marker or something, but I couldn't shake the feeling that it wasn't right. The next day, I went back with my friend Matt. I wanted him to see it too, figure out if maybe I was just imagining things. We got there mid-afternoon after a short hike. When we reached the spot, the hillside looked empty. The metal thing was gone. The ground where it had been was smooth. No signs of disturbance or anything left behind. We searched around, looking for tracks or footprints, anything that might explain it. Nothing. No signs anyone had been there overnight. No tire marks or paths. The dirt looked like it hadn't been touched in a long time. Matt was baffled and said maybe I was seeing things or mixed up the location, but I was sure. I even showed him the pictures I took the day before. The photos were clear enough. The object looked the same, sitting there half buried in the hill. But when we looked back at the spot, it was like it never existed. I even tried to mark the place on my GPS, and the coordinates matched where we stood. Still, the metal shape was gone. We spent the next hour walking the surrounding area trying to find any clue where it might have gone or if it was moved. No luck. The forest was quiet, like the day before. Except this time I noticed something else. A kind of distant, droning sound, low and steady, barely audible, but definitely there. It wasn't wind or traffic, just a soft mechanical hum coming from somewhere uphill. Matt didn't hear it, or at least he said he didn't. I wasn't sure if I was imagining that too. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about that object and how it vanished. It didn't feel like something that just got taken away by a person, and I didn't see any signs of tampering around it. It felt like it was never there, or maybe it wasn't supposed to be there. The next few days, I went back to the valley a couple more times. I tried to find anything unusual, strange lights, noises, movements, but nothing. Just normal woods. No sign of the metallic shape or the weird silence that came with it. I still think about that thing sometimes when I'm out hiking or even just sitting at home. Like there's something out there, something watching or waiting that doesn't belong. And maybe I saw a glimpse of it or a trace of it, but I don't know what exactly. I'm not a person who usually believes in weird stuff. I'm practical. But that thing, whatever it was, didn't fit with anything normal I know. And the fact it disappeared like that, well, I can't explain it. It all started when I went to the lake with a few friends for a weekend trip. We had all agreed on going to the park for a couple of days to get away from everything and just relax. It had been a while since I had been to that lake, but it was always one of my favorite places to go. The water was clear, the air was fresh, and the peacefulness of it all just made you forget about everything else. But that weekend, something changed. It was a Saturday afternoon when I first noticed it. We were lounging by the shore, soaking in the sun and chatting, when I saw it, a strange, soft glow coming from the lake. At first, I thought it was just the light reflecting off the water in a way I hadn't seen before. But as I looked more closely, I realized it wasn't the sunlight. It wasn't anything natural. The water had taken on this eerie, pale blue glow. It wasn't bright or flashy, but it was enough to catch your attention. I wasn't the only one who noticed. My friends started looking at it too. Jenna, one of my friends, stood up and pointed. "Is that normal?" she asked. None of us had ever seen anything like it. We didn't really think much of it at first. We all just assumed it was some kind of optical illusion or something. Maybe algae or minerals in the water were reacting to the sun in a strange way. After all, we were all familiar with this lake, and it never did anything like that before. But we weren't exactly experts on lakes or anything. After a few minutes of talking about it, we decided to just go for a swim. It wasn't too cold, and the glow was kind of mesmerizing. At least it didn't seem harmful, so we didn't think twice about it. I remember stepping into the water and feeling an immediate change in the atmosphere, but I couldn't quite place it. The air felt thicker, almost like the world around us was pressing in just a little more than usual. But at the same time, I felt oddly calm. The first thing I noticed was the way the water felt. It was warm. Not in the way the sun warms a pool, but in a way that almost seemed to come from within the water itself, like the lake was radiating heat, even though it wasn't hot outside. My body felt weightless as I swam. It wasn't a normal feeling. Normally, you'd feel the effort of swimming, the resistance of the water. But in that lake, it was as if the water was holding you up without trying. It felt too easy. I wasn't the only one who noticed this. Everyone else seemed to experience the same thing. We swam around, just floating, hardly moving, and the further we went into the water, the more intense the feeling became. It was like every muscle in my body was completely relaxed, but my mind was clear too. Like I was both awake and asleep at the same time. It was almost hypnotic. It was peaceful, but unsettling at the same time. At one point, I looked over at Jenna, who was floating beside me, and she looked like she was in a trance. She was just staring at the surface of the water, her eyes wide, almost too wide. "Are you okay?" I asked. But she didn't answer. She didn't even seem to hear me. I tried again, this time shaking her shoulder, but she just blinked slowly, like waking up from a dream. She turned to me, and her expression was blank, almost vacant. She didn't say anything, just nodded slowly, like she didn't know what had happened. I was starting to feel uneasy, but I couldn't shake off that strange, calm feeling. I looked around, and it seemed like all of us were acting the same way. We weren't swimming or playing around like we usually would. It was like we were all entranced, just floating in the lake, drifting without any care for time or the world outside. I tried to push the thought out of my head, but something told me that this wasn't right. That's when I noticed something else. The glow in the water wasn't just coming from the surface anymore. It was coming from beneath. The deeper parts of the lake were glowing brighter now, and I could see shapes moving beneath the surface, large shapes. The water around us seemed to hum, a low, vibrating sound that I felt deep in my chest. It wasn't loud, but it was there. It was almost like the lake itself was alive, breathing. "Do you guys hear that?" I asked, but no one responded. They were all still floating, staring at the water. I swam closer to the shore to try to get some distance from whatever was happening, but it felt like the water was pulling me back in. Every stroke I made seemed to take more effort, and the deeper I swam, the stronger the pull became. It was like they didn't want me to leave. That's when I saw it. Just beneath the surface, maybe 10 feet down, there was something large and round. It looked like a stone at first, but as I got closer, I saw that it wasn't. It was some kind of object, smooth and dark, with faint swirling patterns on its surface. It was glowing faintly, pulsing like it was alive. As I stared at it, I realized it was communicating somehow. Not through light or sound, but through the very water itself. I could feel it in my bones, in my head, a presence, like something was trying to speak to me. That's when I snapped out of it. It was like I suddenly realized what was happening. The calmness was gone, replaced by this overwhelming sense of dread. I needed to get out of the water. I didn't know what that thing was, but I knew it wasn't supposed to be there. I called to the others, but they didn't hear me. They were still floating, still staring at the surface of the lake. I swam back to them as fast as I could, but the pull from the lake was stronger now. It was almost like I was swimming through tar. My arms were heavy and my legs felt like lead. It took everything I had just to make it back to the shore. I pulled myself out of the water and turned to look back. That's when I saw it. Jenna was still in the water, but now she wasn't floating. She was sinking. Slowly, like the water was pulling her under. I screamed her name, but she didn't respond. She wasn't even moving. I had to do something. I didn't care if the lake was pulling me back in. I wasn't about to let her drown. I ran into the water, ignoring the strange heavy feeling in my chest. I grabbed her arm and pulled with all my strength, but it felt like I was trying to pull her out of quicksand. The water had a grip on her, pulling her deeper. I couldn't do it alone. I yelled for Mike and Ethan, and they finally snapped out of whatever trance they were in. They rushed over, and together, we pulled Jenna out of the water. As soon as she was on the shore, the pull stopped. The glow in the lake dimmed, and the humming sound faded. We all stood there, panting, looking at the water. The lake was still, peaceful again, but there was no denying what had just happened. We didn't know what that thing was or why it had tried to pull us under, but we knew we couldn't stay. We packed up as quickly as we could and left the lake behind. To this day, I don't know what we encountered that night. Maybe it was some kind of alien organism or maybe something else entirely. But I do know this. I'll never go near that lake again. It started as a routine trip, nothing special. I was working in a remote reserve, deep in a forest that felt like it had been untouched for centuries. My job was straightforward. Catalog species, take soil samples, and make notes on the health of the ecosystem. It wasn't glamorous, but I loved the solitude. The forest felt alive in a way most places didn't anymore. The tree caught my attention because of its size. It was enormous, easily the oldest thing in the area. Its trunk was wide enough to fit a small car, and the bark was thick and gnarled, covered in moss and fungi. The roots spread out like a massive network, some disappearing into the soil while others twisted above ground like thick, muscular veins. I'd seen old trees before, but this one felt different. It had a presence, like it was watching everything around it. I was setting up my equipment near the tree when I felt it, a faint vibration under my feet. At first, I thought it was something normal, maybe the wind shifting the branches or animals moving underground. But the air was still and the vibrations weren't random. They had a rhythm, almost like a heartbeat, soft but steady. I crouched down, pressing my palm to one of the exposed roots. The vibration was stronger there, and it wasn't just a single pulse. It felt layered, like there were multiple rhythms overlapping. I'd never felt anything like it. I tried to tell myself it was probably some natural phenomenon, maybe water moving through the ground or seismic activity, but it didn't sit right. I spent hours around that tree, trying to figure it out. I took soil samples, recorded the vibrations with my phone, even used a basic seismometer I'd brought along. The readings were strange. The patterns didn't match anything geological, and they didn't seem to come from the tree itself. It was like they were coming from deep below it, far beneath the roots. I decided to dig. I didn't have proper tools for a deep excavation, just a small trowel in my hands. The soil was dense and packed with roots, making it slow work. As I dug, the vibrations grew stronger, enough to make my fingers tingle. The deeper I went, the more I felt like I was uncovering something I wasn't supposed to find. About a foot down, I hit something solid. It wasn't a rock. The surface was smooth and cold, metallic, but not like any metal I'd seen before. It had a faint sheen, almost like it was glowing, though there was no light source. I cleared more soil away, revealing a rounded surface that curved downward into the earth. It was big, far bigger than I could uncover on my own. I sat back, staring at it. My chest felt tight, like I was holding my breath without meaning to. The vibrations were constant now, thrumming through the metal and into my body. It felt alive, not like an organism, but like a machine that was aware of me. I didn't want to touch it, but I couldn't stop myself. I pressed my palm to the surface, and everything went still. The forest was silent. No wind, no birds, not even the rustling of leaves. It was like the world had paused. Then, I felt it. Not a vibration, but a sensation, like something brushing against my mind. It wasn't words or images, just an overwhelming sense of being observed. I pulled my hand back, heart pounding, but the feeling didn't go away. I backed away from the tree, unsure of what to do. My first instinct was to leave, but the logical part of me said I needed to document this. I set up my camera, pointing it at the hole I'd dug, and started recording. As I spoke into the microphone, describing what I'd found, the vibrations changed. They grew faster, more intense, and the ground beneath me started to hum. Then, the tree reacted. The roots shifted, creaking like old wood under strain. One of the massive roots lifted slightly, exposing more of the metallic surface. It wasn't random, it was deliberate, like the tree was working with the thing buried beneath it. I froze, watching as the exposed surface began to glow faintly, pulsing in time with the vibrations. I don't know what made me stay, but I couldn't move. The glow intensified, spreading across the ground in a web of light. It was beautiful and terrifying, like watching something far beyond human understanding. I felt that presence again, stronger this time, and it was no longer just observing. It was trying to communicate. The vibrations became patterns, and I realized they were sending a message. It wasn't in any language I knew, but it had structure, like a code. I grabbed my notebook, frantically trying to record the sequences. As I wrote, I felt a strange clarity, like my thoughts were being guided. The message wasn't just sounds, it was ideas, concepts, something I could almost understand but not quite. Then, just as suddenly as it started, it stopped. The glow faded, the vibrations ceased, and the forest came back to life. Birds chirped, leaves rustled, and the tree was just a tree again. The metal surface was still there, but it felt inert, like whatever had been active was now dormant. I didn't sleep that night. I stayed up, going over the patterns I'd recorded, trying to make sense of them. They didn't match any known code or language, but they felt deliberate, intelligent. I thought about the tree, how it had moved, how it seemed connected to whatever was buried beneath it. It wasn't just a plant. It was part of something much bigger. In the morning, I packed up my gear and left. I didn't tell anyone what I'd found. Part of me knew they wouldn't believe me, but the bigger part didn't want anyone else to disturb it. Whatever that thing was, it wasn't meant for us. It was old, older than the forest, maybe older than humanity, and it was still watching. I was checking out this old warehouse on the edge of town. Nothing special about the building itself, just one of those places nobody bothered with for years, boarded up and falling apart. I'm not really into urban exploration or anything, but a friend had mentioned it, said there was some weird stuff inside. So I figured I'd take a look. Just me, my flashlight, and a cheap camera. The day was overcast, the kind of gray sky that makes everything look kind of dull and lifeless. I parked a few blocks away and walked over, keeping an eye out for anyone else or security cameras. The front door was locked tight, but there was a broken window on the side I could squeeze through. The glass was jagged and dirty, but I made it inside without much trouble. The place smelled like old dust and something burnt. It was quiet, except for the occasional drip of water somewhere. I moved slow, shining my flashlight around, stepping carefully over broken wood and rusty metal scraps on the floor. The walls were covered with graffiti and peeling paint, and in some spots, the ceiling tiles were missing or hanging loose. After wandering for about 20 minutes, I found a door that looked different, newer hardware, like someone had used it more recently than the rest of the place. It was cracked open just enough to slip through. Inside was a room I wasn't expecting. The ceiling was covered in blackened, scorched tiles, some melted into twisted shapes. Pieces of metal, like parts of light fixtures or ductwork, were bent and warped, looking like they'd been exposed to intense heat. The smell of burnt plastic hung heavy in the air, sharp and unnatural. But when I looked around the rest of the room, the walls and floor didn't have any soot or smoke stains. No scorch marks on the walls, no burnt debris on the ground. It was like the fire only happened up above, in the ceiling, and nowhere else. I kept shining my light, trying to see if there was anything else. The metal debris was odd. Some bits looked like parts of electrical equipment, but I couldn't make out what exactly. There were no wires or cables, just these mangled, melted pieces that seemed to have been twisted into nothing. That's when I noticed something else. The air inside the room was warmer, noticeably warmer than the rest of the building. I pulled out my phone and checked the temperature app. Outside the building, it was around 54 degrees Fahrenheit, but in that room, it was about 70. I didn't feel a draft or anything else explaining the heat. It was just warm. I started to feel uneasy. The silence was heavier here, like the rest of the warehouse noise had been sucked out. I looked back up at the ceiling again. The tiles were warped, bubbling in some places, but none of them had fallen. No ceiling panels were missing, just damaged. Then I noticed faint marks on the floor near the corner. I bent down and saw these weird scorch-like impressions, dark, circular patterns embedded in the concrete. They looked like they'd been made by something hot sitting there, but there was no ash or residue around them. Just these perfect, clean circles, almost like someone pressed hot plates onto the floor. I started taking pictures, but the flash didn't work right in that room. Every photo came out blurry or overexposed, like the camera couldn't focus on anything properly. When I checked the pictures afterward, some had these strange light streaks in places where my flashlight hadn't shined. I decided to get out of there. The warm air felt like it was pressing against me now, making it hard to breathe right. On my way back to the hallway, I heard a low humming sound, very faint, almost like electricity buzzing, but more like a vibration under the skin. It wasn't constant, it came and went. I paused and waited, but nothing else happened. No footsteps, no voices, just that subtle vibration. When I got back outside and looked around the building from the street, it looked like a normal abandoned warehouse. No smoke, no scorch marks on the outside. The air was cold again, the temperature back to normal. I drove home thinking about that room, how it looked like something intense happened there, but with no signs anywhere else, like it was contained or erased somehow. I still don't know what caused those scorch marks or why the room was warm or what that humming was, and I keep wondering if someone else has been in there recently, maybe messing with the place in ways I can't understand. That's the last time I went back. I don't know what I stumbled onto, but I don't want to find out anymore. The train stopped about halfway between Leeville and Aldridge, right where the track cuts through that patch of woods. I was in the second car, reading on my phone with my earbuds in, when the lights flickered and we started slowing down. At first I figured it was just a regular delay, happens all the time on that line. But then we came to a full stop and the lights dimmed to that emergency level, just enough to see everyone's faces. A couple people around me took out their earbuds too, looking up. Nobody said anything right away. Then, this guy in a suit up near the front leaned into the aisle and asked if anyone else's phone had just lost service. I checked mine. No bars, no data. I tried toggling airplane mode a few times, but nothing came back. That was weird, but not impossible. That area's always been a dead zone. We sat there for maybe 10 minutes. A few people started getting restless. One guy stood up to see if he could find a conductor, but he came back a minute later and said the doors wouldn't open. He wasn't panicking, just annoyed. Everyone else just kind of shrugged it off. We all thought the train would start up again any second. The fog started rolling in around then. I noticed it out the window. At first it looked normal, patchy, low to the ground, but then it got thick, real thick, fast. Within 5 minutes, you couldn't see more than a few feet past the tracks. It just sort of swallowed everything up. That's when people started pulling their phones again to take pictures, but Most of them gave up when the photos came out blank or all washed out. Then the lights cut out completely. Just for a few seconds, but it was long enough to hear everyone shift and murmur. When they came back on, we were still just sitting there, dead quiet outside. Not even birds. You'd expect something, but there was nothing. It was like the fog muffled everything. The first person who saw something was a woman sitting across from me. She was quiet the whole ride, maybe mid-40s, work badge still clipped to her blouse. She leaned forward and tapped on the glass, kind of gently, like she thought someone was out there. I looked over, and she whispered something like, "Do you see them?" I turned to look. At first, I didn't see anything. Then my eyes adjusted. There were shapes in the fog, tall ones, thin, spread out, maybe 6 or 7 of them, just barely visible, like silhouettes but off somehow. I thought it might be trees, but there's no trees that close to the tracks there, and they weren't there before. They didn't move, just stood there, too still and too tall, at least 8 feet, maybe more. Long arms, or what looked like arms, hanging straight down. Someone a few rows behind us gasped, and that started the whispering. You could hear it ripple through the car. People pointing, quietly asking each other if they were seeing the same thing. A guy near the back pulled his phone out and started filming. I remember the red record light blinking. He zoomed in on the window and muttered something like, "What the hell is that?" The figures were still there. No movement, not even a twitch, just lined up, facing the train. One of the kids a few seats up started crying softly. Her mom told her it was okay, that it was just construction workers in the fog, but no one believed that. There were no lights, no vests, no equipment, and the fog was too thick. You couldn't fake those shapes. After a few more minutes, one of the figures, the one closest to us, shifted. It didn't step forward exactly, but it got closer. Like one moment it was 20 feet out, and then it was 10. Still not moving, just closer. That's when people really started freaking out. A couple of passengers went to the front door, banging on it, shouting for the conductor. Someone said the intercom wasn't working. No announcements, no explanation. We were locked in, just stuck. A woman stood up and tried to open the emergency exit, but it wouldn't budge. She said it was jammed. A man in the front car tried pulling down the window, and that didn't work either. Everything was unresponsive, like the whole train had shut down. We were just sitting in a tube, sealed up tight with those things outside. I looked back out the window. The one that had moved was gone. The others were still there, still watching. A guy next to me whispered, "Where'd it go?" No one answered. Then the lights flickered again and came back up brighter, normal bright, and the train lurched forward. Just like that. Like nothing had happened. We rolled slowly at first, then picked up speed, and the fog thinned almost immediately. Within 2 minutes, we were pulling into Aldridge Station like everything was fine. People poured out onto the platform. Everyone was talking, some quietly, some loud and nervous. The conductor was already out of his booth, walking up and down like he didn't know what the hell had happened. He kept saying there'd been a systems glitch, that we'd lost power briefly, but everything was okay now. Someone asked about the fog and the shapes. I thinking it was the guy who filmed. The conductor looked at him like he was nuts. He said he hadn't seen anything. A few of us stayed behind and asked if we could talk to someone. Someone official. I don't know what we expected. Eventually, a transit cop came by and said they'd review the cameras and log the event, but there was no danger, no injuries, so we should go on our way. The next day, someone who'd been on the train posted screenshots from the CCTV feed. They'd gotten them through a friend who worked in the control room or something. The weird thing was, you could see all of us in the car, pointing at the windows, reacting. But outside, nothing. Just the fog. No figures, no shapes, not even shadows. There were 4 different angles, and in every one, it looked like we were losing our minds over empty air. The guy who filmed with his phone posted his video too. Same thing. He was aiming right at them, talking about what he saw, but the footage was just blank white fog. I don't take that line much anymore. If I have to go that way, I drive. Just seems easier. Safer, somehow. I asked around a bit, tried to find the woman who first pointed them out, or the guy in the suit who lost service. Nobody seemed to know who they were. I'm not even sure they got off at Aldridge with the rest of us. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if the train hadn't started back up. If we'd stayed there, with the fog closing in and whatever those things were waiting just past it. Waiting for what? I don't know. I was out for my usual early morning jog, the kind where the sun's not quite up yet, but the sky's starting to lighten a bit. It was late summer, and the air had that damp, cool feel you get just before dawn. I like running before the world wakes up. Quiet, nothing around except the road, some trees, and the occasional field. That morning, I was on a stretch where the road runs along this big cornfield. I'd passed it dozens of times, but something about that day felt different. I was maybe a quarter mile in when I noticed it. A silver sphere, just hovering a few feet above the corn stalks. Not moving, not making a sound. It wasn't high up like a balloon or drone, but low enough that if I'd walked into the field, I could have touched it. At first, I thought it might be some kind of weather balloon or an experimental drone, but it wasn't moving at all. Just hanging there, perfectly still. The surface was smooth, reflective like chrome, but dull, not shiny or polished. I stopped running and stared for a few seconds, trying to figure out if I was imagining it or if it was some weird trick of the light. There were no blinking lights or anything mechanical about it. No wires, no support holding it up. The corn around it didn't move either. No wind or breeze. The whole thing felt off, like something out of place. I thought about pulling my phone out to take a picture, but the screen was dead. Battery was fine the night before, but it wouldn't turn on. Figured maybe the cold had something to do with it, so I shoved it back in my pocket and kept looking. The sky was brightening slowly, and as the sun crept closer to the horizon, the sphere started to fade. Not by moving away or anything, but just becoming less solid, like it was flickering out of existence. I blinked a couple of times, but when I looked back, it was gone. I wasn't sure how long I stood there. The silence was heavy, but there was no sound coming from the sphere, no humming or buzzing like you'd expect from a drone or machine. Just the regular early morning quiet, maybe the distant call of a bird or something. I started running again, trying to shake the weird feeling, but it stuck with me. When I got home, I told my wife what I'd seen, but she just gave me that look like I was making it up, or maybe I'd been half asleep. I didn't blame her. It sounded crazy. I checked my phone. Battery was fine again. No idea why it died just then. I tried to find news or anything online about some weird event, but nothing. I kept thinking about it all day. This strange quiet, the way it just hung there and then disappeared. I went back to that spot in the afternoon to see if I could find anything left behind. The field looked normal at first, tall, green corn standing straight, but then I noticed a patch near the edge, right where the sphere had been. The corn was completely flattened, like someone had pressed down on it hard, but it wasn't random. It was a perfect rectangle, sharp edges, straight lines, looked almost like someone had taken a giant stamp and pressed it down. The stalks weren't broken or snapped. They were just lying flat, all pointing the same way, like they'd been carefully pushed over. I walked around it, feeling the ground. It was dry, no footprints or tire tracks. The soil wasn't disturbed beyond the flattened corn. No signs of fire, no scorch marks or anything else unusual, just that strange patch in the middle of the field. I took a few photos with my phone. No weird light streaks or glitches this time, just the rectangle of flattened corn. I told a neighbor about it, an older guy who's lived around there forever. He said he hadn't noticed anything the night before or that morning. No planes or helicopters, no noise or flashing lights. He didn't believe in that stuff, but admitted it was odd. That night, I kept thinking about the sphere and the field. I felt like I was being watched for a while, but when I looked outside, nothing was there. No cars, no shadows moving near the house. The next few days, I checked the field every morning. The flattened patch stayed the same. No new damage, no signs anyone had been near it. The rest of the corn grew like normal, untouched. I don't know what I saw that morning or what made the field look like that. It's still out there, the rectangle of flat corn, just a few feet from the road. People drive by it, but no one talks about it much. Sometimes I wonder if I should go back, see if the sphere ever comes back, but I don't know if I want to. It started as a normal camping trip. There were four of us: me, my brother Ethan, and two of our friends, Mike and Jenna. We picked this spot deep in the woods because it was supposed to have the clearest skies for stargazing. None of us were experts or anything, but we liked looking at the stars, and it was a good excuse to get away from the city. The first night was uneventful. We set up camp, made a fire, and stayed up late talking. The sky was as clear as promised. You could see everything, more stars than I had ever noticed before. We even saw a few shooting stars. It felt peaceful. The second night, things started to feel different. It was subtle at first. The air got colder, even though the forecast said it would stay warm. The woods around us got quieter too. No wind, no insects, no rustling leaves, just silence, except for us. It was like everything around us was holding its breath. We ignored it at first. We were sitting around the fire when Mike pointed out something weird about the sky. He said it looked like it was moving. At first, I thought he was just imagining things, but then we all saw it. The stars weren't where they had been the night before. They were shifting like ripples in a pond after you throw a rock in. Ethan said it was probably just some kind of atmospheric phenomenon like heat waves or auroras, but it didn't feel natural. The stars didn't just distort, they moved, bending and twisting, like someone was stirring them. Jenna thought it was amazing and wanted to take pictures, but her phone wouldn't turn on. None of our electronics worked. Even the flashlight flickered and went out. The fire started acting weird too. The flames stretched upward like they were being pulled and then froze. They didn't flicker or move, just held still, frozen mid-dance. The light stayed the same, but it didn't feel warm anymore. We were all staring at it, too stunned to say anything, when the ground started vibrating. It wasn't an earthquake. It was too rhythmic, like a heartbeat, slow and steady. We could feel it through the soles of our shoes, but nothing around us was shaking. The trees stood perfectly still, and the ground didn't crack or shift. It was just that steady, unnatural thrum. Jenna was the first to speak. She said she felt dizzy, like the ground wasn't solid anymore. Mike agreed, and I started to notice it too. It felt like we were standing on something that wasn't quite there, like the forest had turned into a picture of itself and we were standing inside it. Everything looked the same, but it didn't feel real. Then the sky above us split open. I don't know how else to describe it. One moment it was just rippling, and the next it peeled back, like someone was unzipping the night. Behind it was something else. Not space, not more stars, just a blank, endless void. It wasn't black or white. It didn't have a color at all. It was just nothing. We couldn't move. We couldn't look away. The stars we had been staring at were gone, replaced by this empty, endless void. And then something came through it. It wasn't a ship, not in the way you think of ships anyway. It was like a massive, floating shape made of light and shadow, constantly shifting. It didn't have a fixed form. One moment it looked like a sphere. The next, it stretched into something like a spiral or a tower. It wasn't solid, but it wasn't see-through either. It was just there, hovering silently above us. The vibrations in the ground stopped, but now we could hear something. A low hum so deep it felt like it was inside us, vibrating in our bones. It wasn't just a sound, it was a feeling, like pressure, like the air was too thick to breathe. Mike tried to say something, but no sound came out. He looked terrified, and so did the rest of us. Then the bubble appeared. I don't know when it started, but suddenly we were surrounded by a faint shimmer in the air, like heat waves rising off pavement. It formed a dome around us, enclosing our campsite and part of the forest. Beyond it, everything was distorted, like looking through a warped lens. The trees outside bent and stretched, and the ground looked like it was tilting away from us. Inside the bubble, time felt strange. The fire was still frozen, but the light didn't seem to fade or flicker. The hum grew louder, and we started seeing flashes of light in the air, like tiny sparks that disappeared as quickly as they appeared. The floating shape in the sky didn't move closer, but it didn't go away either. It just hung there, shifting and changing. Then beams of light shot down from it. They weren't like searchlights or lasers. They were soft, almost misty, but they moved with purpose, scanning the ground. One of them swept over our campsite, and I swear for a second I couldn't feel my body. It was like I was weightless, floating, but still standing in the same spot. When the light passed, the hum faded and the shimmering dome around us began to collapse. It didn't vanish all at once. It shrank, pulling inward toward the floating shape above. As it did, the frozen fire flickered back to life and the woods outside returned to normal. We could hear the wind again, and the cold air started to feel natural. When the dome was gone, the shape in the sky pulsed once, like it was taking a breath, and then it slipped back through the rip in the sky. The void closed behind it, sealing up like it had never been there. The stars snapped back into place, and the night was normal again. None of us said a word. We just sat there, staring at the fire, trying to process what had happened. When we finally spoke, we couldn't agree on what we'd seen. Jenna thought it was some kind of advanced technology. Mike thought it was a natural phenomenon we didn't understand. Ethan refused to talk about it at all. We packed up and left at first light. None of us wanted to stay another night in that place. Even now, I don't know what it was. I don't think I'll ever know. But sometimes when I look at the night sky, I wonder if it's still out there, watching, waiting for the right moment to come back. It was around 3:15 in the morning, middle of a long haul between Laredo and Phoenix. I'd pulled out of El Paso a couple hours earlier and was deep into that stretch of I-10 where the road flattens out and everything just kind of blurs into empty desert. No towns, no exits, just headlights and blacktop. I'd stopped at a rest area back in Sierra Blanca to stretch my legs and take a piss. Checked my watch before getting back in the cab, 3:09. I remember that because I was trying to decide whether I'd make it to Lordsburg by sunrise or not. Anyway, traffic was non-existent, just me and whatever was on the radio. I had the window cracked a little for fresh air and was nursing a gas station coffee that tasted like burnt cardboard. The road was dead quiet, except for my engine and tires humming along. That's when I saw the light. It wasn't headlights or anything like that. It was a single orb, glowing kind of bluish white. Hard to say how big it was, but maybe the size of a basketball. It came from the right side of the road, low, maybe 10 feet off the ground, and crossed directly in front of my truck. Fast, but smooth. It didn't bob or dip, just a steady horizontal glide. No sound. I hit the brakes, not hard, but enough to slow down, just out of reflex. It was close, maybe 40 yards ahead, and gone in 2 or 3 seconds. It crossed the road and disappeared into the dark on the other side. No flash, no trail. Just blinked out into the scrubland. I sat up straighter, blinked a few times, thinking maybe I just imagined it. But my heart was going a little faster, and I noticed my arms had goosebumps. I coasted for a bit before easing back on the gas. When I passed the spot where it had crossed, I slowed down again and looked out the side window. There was nothing. Just rocks, low brush, and blackness. No fences, no utility poles, no towers. I rolled the window down all the way and leaned out. No sound, no wind, just empty. I looked down at my dashboard clock and it said 3:13, which didn't feel right. I glanced at my watch again, 3:19. I frowned, thinking maybe my dashboard clock had just reset or something, but I'd checked both earlier at the rest stop and they'd matched. I remember checking because I'd been thinking about calling my wife and wanted to make sure it wasn't too late. The dash clock and my watch were both at 3:09 when I left. Now they were 6 minutes apart. I tapped the clock, thinking maybe it was a glitch or bump in the road, messed it up. But it was digital and locked in. I turned on my dome light, double-checked my wristwatch. Still 3:19. I remember holding my wrist up toward the dash like I was waiting for them to sync back up or something, but they didn't. I drove a little while longer, just trying to shake it off. Told myself it was just a weird coincidence. The light, the clock, maybe I'd zoned out for a minute. But that didn't sit right. I hadn't been tired, and 6 minutes isn't zoning out. That's a full-length song. That's 2 exits. That's enough time to know something's off. I kept glancing at the sky after that. I don't usually do that when I'm driving. It's just stars or clouds, and you've got to keep your eyes on the road. But I couldn't help it. I'd look up between billboards and check the rear view every now and then, like I expected to see that light again. I didn't. About 30 minutes later, I passed a mile marker and realized I was making better time than I should have been. Not by much, maybe 6 or 7 minutes. But still, it lined up too clean with the missing time on the dash clock. I checked both again. Wrist said 3:47. Dash said 3:41. I drove the rest of the way into Lordsburg without stopping, pulled into the truck plaza and parked. I got out, walked around the rig, checked the tires, just needed to do something with my hands. Everything looked fine. No dings, no dents, no weird scorch marks or whatever I half expected to find. Inside, I bought another coffee and made a dumb joke to the cashier about being the only one alive on that highway. She just nodded like she'd heard worse. I thought about mentioning the light, but didn't. Not sure why. I just didn't want to hear her tell me it was probably a drone or swamp gas or whatever. Back in the truck, I synced the dash clock to my watch manually. It stayed in sync the rest of the trip. But I think about that light a lot. Not just how it moved or where it went, but that quiet, that totally dead silence when it passed. I drive through the desert all the time, and it's never completely silent. There's always some wind, a rattle, an engine hum, but right then, nothing. Like the whole stretch of road held its breath. And those 6 minutes. I don't have a good reason for why the dash clock lost time, but the watch didn't. Or why it was only 6 minutes. Or why it happened right when that thing flew by. I have seen all kinds of weird crap on the road. Accidents, people walking barefoot in the middle of nowhere, animals staring at you from the brush. But this was different. This didn't feel like something I was supposed to see. I was driving home late one night through the mountain pass. It was one of those thick fog nights where everything feels quieter, like the world's been wrapped up in cotton. I'd left a friend's place pretty late, maybe around midnight, and the roads were empty except for me. The fog had been creeping in for a while, first just a little mist, then it got thicker the farther up the road I went. The pass is this winding stretch with steep cliffs on one side and dense trees on the other. There aren't many streetlights, just the occasional reflector post along the guardrail. I was doing about 40, careful with the slick road and low visibility. The fog made everything blurry and muted. Sounds were dull, headlights looked like fuzzy halos, and the trees all around looked like shadows. I remember the first weird thing was the headlights. I was coming around a bend and saw a pair of bright lights up ahead, just sitting there. At first, I thought it was a car stopped on the side, maybe someone broken down or pulled over. But the more I looked, the less it made sense. The headlights were about 50 feet off the ground. They were just hanging there. No body of a car underneath or around them. No tires, no outline, nothing. I slowed down, squinting through the fog, trying to figure out what I was seeing. The lights stayed perfectly still, not blinking or moving, just hovering maybe 100 feet ahead and definitely off the road. They were too high up to be normal headlights. They were just floating. I blinked a few times and adjusted my rearview mirror to check behind me. No other cars, no follow lights. Just my truck's dim taillights, disappearing into the fog behind. I kept driving, slow and steady, but the headlights stayed there, just floating in the fog like some weird street decoration someone had put up. I wasn't thinking about aliens or anything like that, just how odd and out of place it was. As I got closer, the fog seemed thicker around the lights. The air felt heavier. The lights flickered a little, not like a bulb going out, more like a pulse. They dimmed and brightened rhythmically, slow and even. I caught my breath, realizing this wasn't normal at all. I glanced down at the dashboard and noticed my phone had lost signal. No bars, no notifications, nothing. I tried to call my friend back, but the call didn't connect. It was like the fog was swallowing all signals too. I passed under the lights slowly, keeping my eyes on the road, but feeling like I was being watched. The temperature dropped suddenly, and the truck's heater struggled against the chill. My hands tightened on the steering wheel. The lights stayed above me for maybe a minute. I'm not sure how long. It felt like forever and no time at all. When I finally looked up through the windshield, I saw the headlights fade out all at once, just gone. No flicker, no fade. Just nothing. Right after, the fog thinned and the normal yellow streetlights down the road flickered back on. The air warmed up a bit. I looked in the rearview mirror again, but there was nothing behind me. No floating lights, no cars. I kept driving, but the feeling didn't leave me. The silence was too quiet, like the world was holding its breath. Every time I glanced at the spot where the lights had been, I half expected them to pop back into view. Once I got down to the valley and the fog cleared, the radio buzzed back to life. My phone started picking up signal again. Nothing else happened on the drive home. The roads were just roads, the trees just trees. I still think about those lights sometimes. What I saw or thought I saw. There's no clear explanation, no car, no reflection, no wires, just headlights floating in the fog, totally detached from anything real. It didn't chase me or do anything, just hung there, watching. I drove that pass a few times since then, late at night, but I haven't seen anything like that again. I was in the forest on a photography trip when it happened. I don't like cities much, and being out in the woods away from the noise was something I always looked forward to. I had my camera gear with me, hoping to get some good shots of the wildlife. The area I was in was pretty remote, a national forest about 2 hours from the nearest town. I'd been there a few times before and always saw plenty of deer, birds, and the occasional fox. It was early afternoon when I first noticed something odd. I had been following a narrow trail for a while, moving slowly and keeping an eye out for anything worth photographing. The forest was quiet, almost too quiet. Usually you could hear birds singing or squirrels rustling in the trees, but there wasn't much of that now. Just the sound of my boots on the dirt path and the occasional creak of the trees in the wind. I rounded a bend in the trail and saw a herd of deer up ahead, maybe a dozen of them. They were standing in a small clearing, just past a dense line of pines. At first, I was excited. I'd been hoping to find some deer to photograph, but as I got closer, I realized something wasn't right. They weren't moving. Not grazing, not walking, not even twitching their ears. They were all standing perfectly still, facing the same direction, like statues. I crouched down behind a bush and pulled out my camera, adjusting the zoom to get a better look. Through the lens, I could see their faces more clearly. Their eyes were wide, not in a normal way, but in a way that made my stomach knot up. They looked scared, or maybe entranced. All of them were staring at the same spot, deep in the forest. I followed their gaze, but I couldn't see what they were looking at. Just trees and shadows. I watched them for a while, waiting for them to move, but they didn't. It was like they were frozen. Even the wind didn't seem to touch them. Their fur didn't ruffle, and their tails didn't flick. It was unnerving. After a while, I decided to investigate. I left my camera on the ground and slowly walked toward the clearing. The closer I got, the more I felt something strange in the air. It wasn't cold exactly, but the air felt heavier, like the pressure before a storm. My skin started to tingle, and the hairs on the back of my neck stood up. When I stepped into the clearing, the deer didn't react. They didn't even seem to notice me. I could have walked right up to them and touched one, and I don't think they would have moved. But I didn't try. Something about the way they stood there made me nervous. Instead, I kept going, following the direction they were looking. The trees got denser as I moved further in, and the light filtered through the branches in strange patterns. The tingling sensation got stronger. I started to hear a faint sound, like a low hum, coming from up ahead. It was barely audible at first, but it got louder the closer I got. It wasn't like anything I'd heard before. It wasn't a machine, and it wasn't natural. It had a rhythm to it, but it didn't match any sound I could recognize. Then I saw it. At first, I thought it was just a trick of the light. There was a glow coming from between the trees, soft and faint, like moonlight, but wrong for the time of day. As I got closer, I saw the source of the light. It was a sphere, about the size of a beach ball, hovering a few feet off the ground. It wasn't solid, at least not in the way I understood solid. The surface seemed to ripple and shift like liquid metal, but it didn't drip or flow. The glow wasn't steady either. It pulsed, growing brighter and dimmer in a rhythm that seemed deliberate. I froze, unsure of what to do. The hum was louder now, resonating in my chest. It felt almost like music, but it wasn't music. It was something else entirely. The sphere didn't move, but I got the sense it was aware of me. That sounds crazy, but that's the only way I can describe it. It felt like it was watching me, even though it didn't have eyes. Then I noticed the animals. The deer weren't the only ones there. Birds were perched silently on the branches above, their heads turned toward the sphere. A fox was crouched low to the ground nearby, its body tense but unmoving. Even a pair of raccoons sat still, staring at the same spot. None of them reacted to me. They were all fixated on the sphere, like they were in some kind of trance. I don't know how long I stood there, staring at it. It could have been minutes, or it could have been hours. Time felt different. The sphere pulsed, and the hum seemed to change, shifting in tone and intensity. It wasn't random. It felt like it was trying to communicate, but I couldn't understand what it was saying. I started to feel lightheaded, like I was standing too close to something I wasn't supposed to be near. Finally, I backed away. Slowly at first, then faster as the hum grew louder. The animals didn't follow me. They didn't even seem to notice I was leaving. I ran back to the clearing where the deer had been, but they were gone. The whole forest felt different, like the air was lighter now, but the sense of unease stayed with me. I didn't stop running until I reached my truck. I drove away as fast as I could, not looking back. I haven't been back to that forest since. I don't know what I saw, and I'm not sure I want to know. But sometimes when I close my eyes at night, I can still hear that hum, faint and distant, like a memory I can't shake. I work the overnight shift at a gas station on the edge of town. It's the kind of place that mostly sees the same few late-night travelers or local workers grabbing a quick snack or gas. Usually, nights drag, but every once in a while, something happens that messes with your head for a while. One night, around 2:30 a.m., I was restocking the cooler by the back of the store when I glanced out the big front window. The sky was clear, and I caught something strange moving just above the horizon. It looked like a bright streak of light, maybe a shooting star or a plane, but it didn't behave like either. The light streaked across the sky quickly, then suddenly stopped midair. It just hung there, paused like someone had hit pause on a video. Then, just as suddenly, it darted backward the way it came, only faster, disappearing behind the trees. I blinked and rubbed my eyes. The whole thing only lasted about 5 seconds. There was no sound, no hum, no crackle, nothing. I was sure I would have heard a plane or something moving that fast overhead, but the gas station was dead silent except for the old refrigerator humming. Curious, I went over to the security cameras mounted outside, which cover the parking lot and a bit of the sky. The footage showed the same thing, a blurry white streak crossing the sky, freezing in place, then zooming back the other way. The object was just a bright, fuzzy shape. No wings or tail, no blinking lights like an airplane, nothing that looked familiar. I showed the clip to my coworker when she came in for the next shift, but she just shrugged. She said she never heard or saw anything while she was on. Nobody else mentioned anything weird that night. The next day, I asked a few regulars if they'd noticed anything strange, but no one had. The local news was quiet, no reports of meteor showers or planes. It was like the whole thing had happened only in my head, except the security footage was real. I kept thinking about the silence. Normally, with something moving that fast in the sky, especially close enough to see clearly, you'd hear at least a faint noise. But that night, there was nothing. Not even a gust of wind or a rustling tree. Over the next few days, I rewatched the footage a bunch of times. Each time I looked, I noticed little things I hadn't before, like the way the object's edges shimmered, almost like heat waves, but it was cold outside. Or how the light seemed to flicker, like it wasn't steady but pulsing softly. One night after my shift, I went outside and looked up, hoping to catch whatever it was again. The sky was empty except for stars, and it felt normal, quiet. But I kept thinking about that frozen streak in the sky, and how it vanished without a trace. I haven't seen anything like it since. Sometimes I wonder if anyone else ever caught a glimpse, or if I was just the only one awake to notice. The footage stays saved on my phone, but it doesn't explain anything. Just a blurry light, moving weird, silent, and gone. I was coming in for a landing at a small regional airport one evening, about an hour before sunset. The sky was clear, and the whole flight had been uneventful until the final approach. I was flying a single-engine prop plane, nothing fancy, just enough to get me from point A to B. As I lined up with the runway, I glanced out the left window and saw something that threw me off. There was another plane, or at least it looked like one. It was hovering just above the runway, maybe 50 feet up, perfectly still. No movement, no engine noise. It was kind of hard to make out details at first because it was dusk, but the shape was definitely a plane, a small one, with wings and what looked like a tail. At first, I thought maybe the tower had cleared another plane to land, and I hadn't been told, so I radioed in. Ground control, this is Cessna 3571. I have a plane holding just above the runway. Can you confirm? There was a crackle, then the voice came back clear. Cessna 3571, we have no other aircraft on final or in the pattern. Runway is clear for landing. I blinked, checked my instruments, looked back out the window. The shape was still there. It didn't move or change in any way. I started to wonder if I was seeing things or if it was some kind of weird reflection, but the shape's outline was too distinct, too steady, and it definitely wasn't a drone or a balloon or anything I'd seen before. I radioed again. Ground control, you're sure? There's definitely something holding just above the runway. It looks like a plane, but it's not responding. No lights or anything. Negative, Cessna 3571. No traffic on or near the runway. You're cleared to land. I nodded to myself, but I kept staring out the window. The thing was just hovering there, motionless. Then I noticed something else. There was no sound. No engine noise, no wind disturbance, nothing. Just silence. I started my descent carefully. The whole time I had this feeling like I was being watched, but when I glanced away, there was nothing unusual in the cockpit. I tapped the mic again, trying to get someone to confirm what I was seeing, but the tower repeated the same thing. No traffic, runway clear. As I got closer, I noticed the shape started to look less and less like a plane. The edges were kind of blurry, almost like it was shifting or melting into the air around it. It wasn't reflecting light like a solid object either. It was darker than the sky, but not like a shadow, more like an absence of light. I slowed my approach, preparing to go around if needed, but the object didn't move. I figured maybe I should just land and let whoever was on the ground check it out. I touched down smoothly, rolled to a stop near the taxiway, and shut down the engine. As soon as I turned off the radio, I glanced back toward the runway. The shape was gone. No trace, no disturbance, nothing. Curious and a bit unsettled, I walked over to the tower to ask if anyone else had reported seeing anything. The guy in the tower looked at me like I'd lost it. Nope, nothing unusual. We monitor everything, and there were no aircraft at all besides you. I checked with the other pilots on the ground, but nobody else had seen anything either. It was like the thing had only appeared to me. Later, while I was getting my bags, I heard from a mechanic that the security cameras near the runway had footage that was weird, just static for a few minutes during the time I was on final approach. The cameras cut out and came back on with no explanation. I asked if I could see the footage, but the mechanic said it was glitchy and not worth looking at. I kept thinking about the shape, how it wasn't quite a plane, how it hovered perfectly still and silent. It didn't behave like anything mechanical I'd seen. I called the airport the next day, hoping to get a better explanation, but all they said was maybe it was a weather balloon or some kind of optical illusion, but that didn't fit. Balloons don't hover still, and I'm used to flying in weird weather conditions. The whole thing has stuck with me. I don't know what I saw, and I don't expect to ever find out. But every time I fly into that airport, I can't help but look out the window, half expecting that shape to be waiting there again. I was camping alone in this spot I'd never been to before, way out in the woods, a few hours from the nearest town. It was supposed to be a quiet weekend to clear my head, no distractions, no one around. I set up my tent just before dark, got my sleeping bag laid out, and turned off my phone because there was no signal anyway. That night, I slept pretty hard until something woke me up. I don't know what time it was, maybe around 2 or 3 in the morning. It was this weird feeling, like the kind you get when you're not quite sure if you're dreaming or awake. I reached over to check my phone, but it was dead. Not just low battery dead, completely off. Strange, because I'd plugged it in before I went to sleep. Then I noticed the tent zipper. Every single zipper on the tent was open about halfway. Not fully unzipped, but just enough to be noticeable, like someone had opened them carefully and then stopped. I froze, trying to tell if I was still dreaming or if this was actually happening. The tent wasn't cold and there was no breeze, so nothing should have made them move on their own. I didn't hear anything outside at first. No footsteps, no animals, nothing. I sat up slowly and unzipped one side of the tent to peek out. The night was really quiet, too quiet, honestly. Usually there'd be some bird or insect noise, but this felt like everything had been muted. Then I saw it. My gear, backpack, water bottle, lantern, even my boots, laid out in the dirt about 10 feet from my tent. But it wasn't just scattered around. It was arranged in this perfect spiral. I mean, every piece was spaced evenly and placed with some kind of purpose. The spiral started small and wound outward, like someone had taken their time to line everything up carefully. I didn't hear or see any footprints in the dirt or grass nearby. I walked around the spiral, looking for tracks, broken twigs, anything that could tell me how this happened. There was nothing. No footprints leading in, no footprints leading out, just my stuff, arranged like some kind of weird art project. I checked my phone again, still dead. I tried turning it on a few times, nothing. I was starting to get this sinking feeling like maybe I wasn't alone out here, but I couldn't hear anything to confirm it. I didn't want to freak out, so I just sat down a few feet from the tent, staring at the spiral, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. After a while, I thought maybe I'd been half asleep and moved the gear myself without remembering. But I know I didn't. I'm too clumsy for that kind of neatness, and there's no way I would have stopped halfway on the zippers and arranged my stuff perfectly outside in the dark. I didn't want to stay out there any longer, but I also didn't want to go back to sleep and wake up with something even stranger waiting. I grabbed my flashlight and started packing my gear up, keeping an eye on the tree line. Still no sound, no movement. As I packed, I noticed something else. The spiral wasn't just random gear placement. The way the lantern was in the center, the water bottle next to it, and my boots further out, it almost looked like some kind of pattern, like a map or a symbol. But I couldn't figure out what it meant. I thought about calling someone, but there was no signal. I tried driving back to get cell service, but as soon as I stepped away from the tent, I got this weird feeling of being watched, like there was something just beyond the tree line, too far to see but too close to ignore. I got in my car, locked the doors, and looked back at the tent and spiral one last time. Everything seemed normal again. The tent zipped up, gear back where it was supposed to be. I don't know if I imagined that part or if it actually changed back, but I didn't wait to find out. I drove home. I keep thinking about that night, about how no one else was around, no sounds, no tracks, and how every zipper was open halfway with my stuff arranged like that. I never found any explanation, and I'm not sure I want one. It was a Tuesday night, early spring. I remember because the windows were open and it was just warm enough not to need a jacket inside. I live out on about 12 acres just outside of town. Nothing fancy, old farmhouse, gravel driveway, big backyard that slopes down toward a tree line. You can see a long way out here, no streetlights, no neighbors in sight, just stars and silence most nights. I'd finished dinner and was cleaning up the kitchen. It was around 9, maybe a little after. The sky was already good and dark. I went out onto the porch with a glass of iced tea and sat on the swing like I usually do. The air smelled like cut grass and damp dirt. Real still. No wind, no crickets, nothing. That's what struck me first. The silence. I didn't notice it at the time because it didn't feel strange at first, but later I realized how quiet it had been. Like the whole yard was holding its breath. I was just staring up, spacing out, like I do. Then I noticed something was different. I don't know how to explain it exactly. My eyes weren't focusing right. There was a spot in the sky that seemed flatter, like a patch that didn't shift when I blinked or moved my head. It was directly above the house. At first I thought maybe it was a cloud, but there weren't any that night. You could see everything, every star, except in that spot. It wasn't black exactly, just empty. I stood up off the swing and took a few steps out into the yard. I tilted my head back and stared at it. It was a triangle, long, thin, with rounded corners. just sitting there, not moving. No sound, no lights. And the weirdest part was I could still see the stars through it. Sort of. Like they were being projected or mimicked, but slightly off. One of the stars inside the shape blinked out for a split second, then came back. That's how I saw the outline. It didn't block out the sky, it didn't cast a shadow, but it was there. I stood there staring at it for maybe 30 seconds, not breathing, not moving. Then I blinked, and it was gone. Just not there anymore. No movement, no fading. 1 second it was overhead, and the next the sky was normal again. I stayed out there for a while, trying to figure out if I'd imagined it. I walked around the yard. I even looked at the ground, thinking maybe there'd be some kind of imprint or disturbance. Nothing. I went inside eventually, but I didn't sleep much. Every sound made me jump. I kept checking the windows. Around 3 a.m., the power went out for about 5 minutes. No wind, no storm, just off and back on. My phone battery drained fast that night too. I plugged it in when I went to bed, and it was at 9% when I checked it at 4:30. 2 days later, I found one of my outdoor motion lights on the back shed had shattered. No sign of impact, no rocks or anything. Just the bulb cracked in its housing. I didn't hear anything when it would have happened. I didn't tell anyone at first. Then about a week later, I mentioned it to a guy I know from the feed store. Older guy, lives about 4 miles down the road. He looked at me real quiet for a second and then said, "You see it too?" I asked what he meant, and he just shook his head and said, "Never mind." He wouldn't talk about it after that. A few nights after that, I woke up around 2 a.m. with this weird pressure in my ears. Not pain exactly, more like when you drive up a mountain and your ears don't pop right. I got up, walked around, checked the house. Everything looked normal. I stepped outside just to make sure the dogs hadn't knocked something over, and it hit me again. The silence. That unnatural kind where you can't hear anything, not even your own footsteps, right? I didn't see anything that time, but I felt like something was there. I don't know where. Just somewhere above. Watching. I stood outside for maybe 10 minutes, waiting for something to move, but it didn't. Eventually, I went back in. The pressure in my ears faded after a couple hours. Since then, nothing else like that's happened. No more shapes in the sky. But I notice little things now. The way the dogs sometimes bark at corners of the yard where there's nothing. The way my porch light flickers every so often, even after I replace the bulb. My phone still dies fast when I'm out in the yard too long at night. I've gone out on the porch every clear night since then, looking. Haven't seen it again. But I keep thinking about how it didn't move, didn't hum, didn't shine. Just sat there, wrong, like a piece of the sky that didn't belong. Like something pretending to be nothing. It started the second week of January, during that stretch of winter where everything feels kind of hollow. I was 17 and still living at home, third floor bedroom, facing the backyard. Nothing but trees past the property line. We had a motion light on the garage, but it was always getting set off by raccoons or wind. I didn't think much about that light anymore. The first night it happened, I was half asleep, scrolling on my phone under the covers. It was almost 2 a.m., quiet except for the hum of the baseboard heater and the occasional gust of wind hitting the window. Then I heard this tapping. 3 short taps, evenly spaced, not loud, just sharp and precise, like a knuckle on glass. I froze. I didn't move, didn't even breathe for a second. My bed was up against the wall opposite the window, so I had a clear view. The blinds were closed, but the way they flexed slightly inward told me the outside air was pressing against them. I waited. A few seconds passed. Then it came again. Tap, 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 same rhythm. My first thought was a tree branch, but there's nothing tall enough to reach my window from the backyard, and definitely not that high up. I live on the 3rd floor, technically the attic. My dad had finished it a few years before, so I could have some space. There's nothing up there but my room and the little staircase. I sat up and just stared at the blinds. I didn't want to look, but I also kind of had to. I eased out of bed and walked over real slow. I didn't pull them up, I just tilted the slats enough to peek through. There was nothing there. Just snow-covered yard, trees in the distance, and the orange glow of the neighbor's porch light. No animals, no branches, no person. I stood there for a while, waiting to see if anything moved. Nothing did. In the morning, I went outside before school. We'd had fresh snow that night, maybe 2 inches. The ground below my window was completely undisturbed. No prints, no scuffs, nothing. Just clean snow, smooth and even, all the way from the garage to the tree line. I didn't say anything to my parents. It felt weird even bringing it up. The next few nights were quiet. I started to think maybe it was just something in the house settling, or ice cracking. But then Saturday came. Same time, a little after 2. I was up late gaming with a friend, headset off for a break, sitting in my chair near the window. I'd just opened a soda when I heard it again. Tap, tap, tap. This time it was closer, sharper, like it was just inches away. I spun around and stared at the blinds. My heart was pounding. I didn't get up. I just sat there holding my drink, waiting. About 30 seconds later, it came again. 3 taps, same rhythm. Not frantic, not random, deliberate. I stood up and yanked the blinds all the way open. Still nothing. Just snow. The backyard was quiet and still. The garage light hadn't come on, which meant nothing had moved across the yard in the last few minutes. And again, no prints. I slept downstairs on the couch that night, didn't even make an excuse. Sunday morning, I went out again and looked for anything. Scratches on the siding, icicles, fallen branches. Nothing. I even knocked on my own window from the inside, trying to match the sound. It was the same. Hollow, quick, like someone's knuckle. But there was no way anyone could be tapping up there without a ladder or something to stand on. And there were no drag marks or signs of equipment in the snow. That night, I stayed up with the light on. I tried to ignore it, told myself it wasn't going to happen again. I kept the blinds open this time. At around 2:20, the tapping came back. I was looking straight at the window when it happened, but I didn't see anything. Just the sound. Same 3 taps, like always. I walked over slowly and pressed my forehead to the glass, cupping my hands around the sides to block the reflection. The snow below looked untouched. The porch light flicked on behind me, casting this long shadow out across the yard, and I flinched, but there was no movement outside. I didn't sleep at all that night. Just lay there, watching the window until the sun came up. Monday after school, I asked my dad if we had any wildlife cameras or trail cams. He used to hunt a little and had a few old ones in the garage. I played it off like I wanted to see if any deer were coming close to the house, maybe use it for a school project or something. He didn't question it. I set one up inside my room, pointing out the window, just behind the blinds. That night, I made sure everything was recording. I even left my light off and stayed under the covers with earbuds in, pretending to sleep. I heard the taps again, 3, like clockwork, around 2:10 a.m. This time they were a little slower, not hesitant, just drawn out, like whoever or whatever it was knew I was listening. I didn't look. I didn't move. I just lay there counting in my head, waiting to see if it would come again. It didn't. In the morning, I checked the camera. Nothing. It recorded all night, caught some headlights from the street, and the light on the garage flickering on once around midnight. But no movement, no figures, and definitely no tapping. That's what really got under my skin. Not that something was out there, but that it somehow wasn't showing up at all. Like it knew where the blind spots were. Or it wasn't something the camera could catch. The next night, I set up my phone too, pointing at the window from a different angle. Both devices on, both recording. Same result. The taps came at 2:17 a.m., but nothing showed up on either video. I even tried syncing the audio. I couldn't hear the taps on the playback at all, like they hadn't happened. By Thursday, I started feeling sick. Not like the flu or anything, just off, dizzy, unfocused. My ears rang on and off all day. I felt like I was being watched constantly, even at school. I was short with people, couldn't sit still. I kept checking over my shoulder like something was following me. I started sleeping downstairs again without saying why. That Friday, everything stopped. No tapping, no noise, no weirdness. The backyard stayed quiet. The snow melted a little from the sun during the day, but I still checked it each morning. No prints, no disturbances. The garage light didn't flicker. My ears stopped ringing. I moved back up to my room on Sunday. I kept the blinds closed and didn't set up the camera again. Whatever it was, it felt like it had moved on. But even now, when I wake up in the middle of the night, especially if it's windy, I find myself staring at the window, waiting, listening. I was about 3 miles into the loop trail when I first noticed the humming. It was just past 5 in the morning. Still pretty dark, but the kind of dark where the sky's starting to turn that deep, early blue. Um, I hike that trail a few times a month when I want to clear my head before work. Never seen more than a few people on it, especially that early. I like it that way. The trail cuts through forest for the first mile or so, then opens into this ridge with a view of the valley below. I'd stopped at the overlook, drank some water, then kept going. It was cold enough that I could see my breath, but not uncomfortably so. Everything felt normal until that sound started. It was low, almost more of a vibration than a sound, like when you stand near a big transformer or an idling diesel engine. Except it wasn't coming from anywhere obvious. No cars, no planes. It wasn't in the ground either. It felt like it was just in the air around me. I paused and looked around, thinking maybe someone had a generator going or something, but there was nothing, just trees and rock and that same weird hum. It wasn't constant either, it sort of pulsed like a slow rhythm. 3 or 4 seconds on, then a couple off, then back on. I remember checking my phone for a signal. 1 bar, no data. I took a few steps off the trail just to see if the sound changed. It didn't. I even turned in a slow circle, trying to figure out if it was coming from a specific direction. It felt like it was coming from everywhere at once. I stood there for maybe 2 minutes before something moved in the trees to my right. At first, I thought it was a person, the way it stepped out so smoothly, but it was a deer. Big doe, maybe 30 yards off. I froze, just out of habit, but it didn't bolt like they usually do. It didn't move at all. It just stood there, completely still. Legs stiff, ears up, not twitching or blinking. It was staring at something above the tree line, over the ridge I had just come from. Not toward me, not toward the trail. Up. That's when I noticed how quiet it had gotten, like everything. No wind, no birds, not even squirrels or anything. Just that pulsing hum and this deer staring up at nothing. I looked up too. I don't know what I expected. Maybe a drone or a plane, but the sky was empty. No clouds, no lights. Just stars and the faint blue of dawn coming in. The treetops were still. Nothing was moving. The deer didn't look away. I swear it didn't even blink. I watched it for what felt like 5 minutes, just waiting for it to do something. Run, turn its head, flick its tail. But it didn't. That weird frozen posture started to bother me more than the humming, like it was stuck. Or being watched too. Eventually I backed away, real slow, and started walking again. The trail curved back into the woods, and I tried to shake it off. Maybe the deer had been sick or something. Maybe there was a plane way higher up I couldn't see. I kept going, but I was more aware of everything. Every little snap of a twig or rustle of leaves made me stop and look. About 10 minutes later, I came across a small clearing where the trees thin out near a rocky slope. There's a signpost there, just trail markers, and I usually stop there to rest before the last leg. As I stepped into the clearing, the humming got louder. Not painfully loud, but enough to feel it in my chest. The kind of low, dense sound that makes your stomach feel tight. And then the shadows shifted. That's the only way I can describe it. The way the early light was coming in through the trees, it cast long shadows across the clearing like usual. But they moved. Not from wind, not from anything natural. The shapes stayed still, but the light that made them shifted, like something huge had passed between the clearing and the sky. I looked up again. Still nothing, but the sound dropped out all at once. Not faded, just stopped, like someone had flipped a switch. I stayed frozen there, staring at the sky. My ears felt weird, like pressure changes after an elevator ride. And then I heard footsteps behind me. Fast ones, crunching on the gravel path. I turned around quick, but no one was there. I waited, listening, but it didn't repeat. The pressure in my ears lingered for a minute or two, then went back to normal. At that point, I seriously debated turning around and heading back, but I figured I was already most of the way through. So I kept walking, faster now. I kept glancing back over my shoulder every couple of minutes. I didn't like the feeling of being alone anymore. As I was coming around the last bend before the descent, I passed another clearing, smaller this time. Just a break in the trees where a fallen pine had opened the canopy. That's when I saw another deer. Or I thought it was. It was on the far side, maybe 40 feet away. But it wasn't standing the same way. It was crouched low, belly almost to the ground, legs bent weird. I couldn't tell if it was lying down or trying to move, but its head was up, just like the first one, and it was looking straight up. This time, I didn't look up. I just stood there, watching it, trying to make sense of how it was positioned. Something about it felt off. The limbs looked too long or too straight, like joints were bent the wrong way. The longer I stared, the more unsure I felt that it was even a deer. Then the sound came back, louder this time. Same low humming pulse, but with an edge to it, like interference or static layered over it. I started moving again, not running, but close. I didn't stop until I was past the switchbacks and could see the trailhead parking lot through the trees. I was the only car there. When I got back to the lot, the sound was gone again. Just the normal morning noises, wind in the trees, some distant bird calls. Sun was fully up now, the sky looked completely normal. I sat in the car for a while before leaving. Didn't turn the engine on right away, just sat there and watched the tree line. Nothing followed me out, but when I drove home, I kept checking the rear view the whole way.